All right. Greetings, everybody. It is the 9th of July, 2020, and we are here for the Athens-Clarke County Mayor and Commission work session. We have just a small handful of items. We're splitting the items into 2 work sessions this month for appropriate focus for all the items to make sure that there's not too much for one evening's load. I believe the first item tonight is going to be the sidewalk or multi-use project over on Cherokee Road. Certainly correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to staff so they can provide a presentation about the options there.
Kelly?
Mayor Barrett?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
We have a special call session to adopt the resolution on the special election and then to go into executive session.
You know, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and do the special called session on the front end. So I'll go ahead and ask you, Madam Clerk, to call the roll.
Davenport?
Here.
Parker?
Here.
Link?
Here.
Wright?
Present.
Jensen?
Here.
Edwards?
Here.
Harrod? Thornton?
Here.
Handy?
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and I'll turn it over to Manager Williams for the voting item on the special called session.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As many of you know, we are needing to have a special called election for District 6 commission. The qualifying for that starts on August the 3rd. I apologize that we're having to bring this to you in a hurry, but in order to go ahead and have this resolution to petition the elections board to call for the special election, we need to go ahead and move on it now so that all of that can be taken care of and we can get to qualifying on August the 3rd.
Thank you, Manager Williams. Any questions from commissioners about this item?
I have a question. You said, as many of us know, can you fill me in on what you're talking about?
Well, okay,
I'm sorry. Was there an email about this? I thought this was about the DA thing.
No, ma'am, and I'm sorry. Commissioner Neesmith passed away, and so he passed away with more than 180 days left on his term, his unexpired term. And so this is for a special called election that would occur at the November election, and it would be to fill the remaining unexpired portion of his term. So at that time, it would be just under 2 months, or right at 2 months. Whichever candidate runs is successful in the November meeting will take office until the first week of January. Is the way I understand it.
Okay, and then is there a memo that outlines the qualifying period is when?
The qualifying period starts on Monday, August the 3rd at 9 a.m. and continues through noon on Wednesday, August the 5th. And of course, your next voting meeting is August the 4th, so we want to get ahead of that.
Gotcha. And so, did you say we have an email from you that outlines this, or from the Board of Elections, or is there?
Yeah, I believe from Board of Elections Director Sesby.
The agenda report went out this afternoon to the mayor and commission.
Yes,
okay.
It is a last minute thing, but it is a formality that is in keeping with the law on this, and we're trying to keep up with the timing.
Gene, was that the 4/28? No.
It went out this afternoon, probably about 2:30 or so. I don't know exactly what time. You had an update on the TAD for the work session, and then you had the this agenda attached to it.
Well, let me go ahead and for everybody's sake, briefly, if the mayor agrees,
please.
I'll just bring this up. I'll share my screen with the. It's very straightforward and very brief.
I appreciate that. I've just been working all day. I haven't been online since this morning, so thanks for catching me up.
Well, and again, I know I apologize for the last minute nature of this. So what you're being asked to do is adopt a resolution that requests the Board of Elections to call for the special election to fill the unexpired term. And that also you have to publish the applicable qualifying fee. And so back in January, y'all set the qualifying fees, and this fee is no different. It's still $450, and it's, as you remember, based on a salary, and that's state law. There's some history items here that speak to how we got to where we are. Of course, and if Attorney Drake wants to speak to this, there was a memo where the special election must be held to fill the remainder of the term. And we've got some quotes from state law here about why we're proceeding with this. And in order to fill it, you have to adopt a resolution to request the board to call for this. And the election will happen on November the 3rd. And the remainder of Commissioner Neesmith's unexpired term would go through January the 5th of 2021. And so that's pretty much all there is to this particular request of you. Attorney Drake, do you care to say anything, or Assistant Manager London?
I think you've done a good job, Mr. Manager, explaining the Georgia law requires that the commission adopt a resolution requesting the Board of Elections and registration call for a special election to fill the District 6 Commissioner's unexpired term. And we have to do it promptly, because I think you have to have the notice published 9 days before the elections. That's why they're pressing to get this done. Public notice in the paper.
Thanks, Judd and Blaine. Any other questions about this item?
I had a quick question. It's more as a curiosity, I think. And I saw like the qualifying fee is based on the state law that says like it shall be 3% of the base salary established by the General Assembly. I guess it seemed odd to me that, this term's going to be for 30 days. I guess I assumed it would be 3% of like the salary for the length of that term, which would be like 1 month, rather than the 3% of the base salary for what I'm guessing is a full year. But
Judd, can you speak to that element?
I don't disagree with Commissioner Denson. It seems a little unjust, but we have to follow the statute, and it doesn't account for the duration of the term.
Okay, that's what I assumed. I was just kind of curious about that. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I have a motion from Commissioner Edwards. I have a second from Commissioner Denson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mayor Gertz, could we have a suspension of the rules motion also?
Oh, thank you. Let's, can I get a motion for suspension of the rules first, please?
So moved.
Second. Again.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Link, a second from Commissioner Parker. Commissioner Edwards, Commissioner Denson, your earlier motion still stand?
Yes.
All in favor of suspension of rules first?
Aye.
Aye.
And again, just for confirmation, all in favor of approval of the motion?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries. I'll now entertain a motion for entry into executive session at the conclusion of the work session.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead, Attorney.
I spoken with the clerk. I thought we were going to do this at the end at 7:30, the executive session, but I'm okay. I've just got to get
Oh, no, I apologize, Judd. We will enter it after the work session.
Okay.
Correct. All right, I'm just I'm getting the motion now just so we have it on the record.
Good. Sorry.
All right, we've got a motion and a second for entering executive session after the work session. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Second on that, please.
Patrick, were you the second on that?
No, I think that was Parker.
I think it's Commissioner Parker.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
All right. All right, we'll go ahead and move into our work session items then. Again, I believe the first item that we're going to discuss tonight is the prospect of either a sidewalk or multi-use trail on Cherokee Road extending toward Buddy Christian Way. And I'll go ahead and turn that over to staff.
Okay.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Stephen Bailey with Public Works, and I'll start off this conversation on Cherokee. Let me see if I can share my screen for this PowerPoint. Give me just a second. All right, is that showing up on your screens?
Got it.
Okay. Great. So what we're bringing you tonight is a follow-up from our work session in November, where staff presented some concepts of the first Athens in Motion sidewalk project. We'll be bringing a number of these to you in the next few months, and starting with the Cherokee Road project tonight. And I'll briefly run through the history of this project, and then I'll turn it over to Ronnie Katrib to explain the different concepts and costs associated. We're hoping to get your input on these concepts, and then we'll take the preferred concept through the next step of public engagement. So I know all of you are aware of the Athens in Motion Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan and the creation of our citizen-led Athens in Motion Commission, as well as the hiring of Hillary Essig, our Bike Ped and Safety Coordinator. Hillary and the AIM Commission have been instrumental in leading bike ped efforts over the last year, and one initiative they've focused on was to make sure that we put each of our potential projects through the lens of complete streets policy. In the case of these sidewalk projects, that meant doing cost comparisons to determine feasibility of installing multi-use paths versus sidewalks at these locations. So last month, staff shared alternative concepts with the AIM Commission, and after comparing costs and benefits, the recommendation is to move forward with a sidewalk only. They did not recommend spending the additional funding on a multi-use path along Cherokee, though we will still be presenting both alternatives here for you tonight, so you can deliberate as well. We were excited to see Cherokee go through our newly updated public engagement process, including an initial public forum in October of last year, and then an on-site walk audit in January, which Commissioner Davenport joined us for. Comments at that audit echoed the recommendation for a sidewalk as opposed to the multi-use path. We will have one more public forum, most likely online, in late July or early August to present the preferred concept, as well as a survey that the GIO is helping us to put together, which will be available for a 2-week period during that same time frame. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ronnie Katrib, who will talk you through the specifics of the Cherokee Road project concepts and explain the next steps.
All right. Well, good evening, Mayor and Commission, all staff, Mr. Blaine and assistant managers. You see here on the screen, this is where we tie in with our sidewalk or with multi-use path. The first location, when I bring your attention to the top left corner, this is on your left would be the driveway for Lowe's. There's an existing sidewalk we'll be tying in at this location, and we'll continue on that side of the road. I'm going to call it the northwest side of Cherokee Road, going towards towards Winterville. And then at Airport Road, the picture right below it, this is where the sidewalk concept alignment crosses the road over to the right-hand side of the road and continues all the way up to Beaver Dam Road. The following picture is the picture on the right. That's kind of representative of what the shoulder looked like. And when we get to Beaver Dam Road, we're veering to the right to tie into an existing sidewalk. It's about 200 feet away from the intersection of Cherokee Road, Buddy Christian Way, and Beaver Dam Road intersection. On the next slide, we'll be looking at the Cherokee Road sidewalk alignment. And this alignment, as I discussed earlier, it would be following that alignment, beginning of the project at Lowe's driveway, crossing the road at Airport Road, and from Morning View Drive continuing on the right-hand side of the road up to Beaver Dam Road and improving the intersection. The alignment chosen that way crossing the road is to benefit the park, Satterfield Park, and connect to the existing sidewalk, and to bring to your attention that there is a sidewalk across the street from Satterfield Park that ends at Morning View Drive. A 5-foot sidewalk, as I mentioned, will be tying in to the existing sidewalk at the project end, top right corner. Rectangular rapid flashing beacons are proposed and at this point preliminary at multiple locations on this project. And they will be going through warrant studies by TPW upon concept approval. And at that point, we'll decide if they are warranted, and then we'll show them in if the preferred alternative concept approved in the upcoming Mayor and Commission agenda item, we'll move into the warrant studies and then present that later in a preliminary plan approval. ADA ramps and signal improvement is proposed at the intersection of Beaver Dam. I believe I mentioned that. There were 3 different sidewalk alternatives developed from this alternative, and the difference between those was mainly the typical section for the shoulder between rural or urban. And on the next slide, we were showing the preferred concept that the cost estimate for it is $909,000 versus the other 2. They were more or less about $100,000 to $150,000 more or less of this price, or this cost, I should say, for construction, right-of-way, and utilities. What you see on this slide is the typical section for the shoulder for 2 distinct sections of this sidewalk. The first one starting from Lowe's and ending at Airport Road. We're utilizing an urban section with curb and gutter and 11.5-foot shoulder. This section is consistent with the existing infrastructure, which is curb and gutter, and it's also has a commercial feel to it versus the section from Morning View Drive all the way up to Beaver Dam Road. We're utilizing a rural section, 13-foot shoulder, and without curb and gutter. There are advantages and disadvantages to this concept compared to a multi-use path or compared to utilizing different typical sections for a sidewalk. Some of those I'll go ahead and read to you. This alternative, it reduces the impact to adjacent property, utility trees, and environmentally sensitive areas. And this is limited to locations with curb and gutter. Again, that is preferred because if we go with rural, then we end up impacting existing parking lots on some businesses adjacent to the Lowe's driveway. And the other advantage is that curb and gutter is a traffic calming measure. Also, the advantage for this concept maintains the current urban versus rural transition between the commercial and residential properties. Disadvantages for this alternative: sidewalk location with respect to edge of roadway will vary. So, one section would be with rural section, the other one would be urban. Also, at the bottom right corner, you see that we're utilizing a urban curb and gutter section at the Temple Baptist Church, and this is to maintain the parking lots existing there and reduce impact to their property. The preferred is that we don't do this. However, we'll leave this option to give us more flexibility in the design, the preliminary design of this project. And so it would be expected to see some curb and gutter in front of the Temple Baptist Church. Disadvantages, like I said, it also it does not accommodate for bicycle traffic, hence why we looked at multi-use path. The following slide is the multi-use path preferred concept. And this multi-use path, as you noticed in the dashed circle, that we're starting on the other side of the road with removing 5-foot sidewalk. And the main reason is that connectivity. It's not preferred for us to put a multi-use path on one side of the road and then switch over. Now, utilizing a typical section of 10-foot path, 3-foot shoulder, grass shoulder, and then 1 foot behind it, we have about 14-foot shoulder for this. It extends about 4,000 feet and up to Beaver Dam intersection. At Beaver Dam intersection, we proposed to close the gap with a 5-foot sidewalk. This concept also include improvement for the intersection at Beaver Dam and Cherokee Road and Buddy Christian Way. It also include us looking into rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which is the RRFBs, the flashing lights for crosswalks across multiple intersections, and that would go into a warrant studies upon approval of the concept. The other alternatives developed, and we're not presenting them tonight, they just give different options within the area between U-Pro self-storage or U-Haul. You would see that on the map labeled, or on Google Map, it said U-Haul. And from that up to Morning View Drive or Airport Road, it depends on what side of the road, if we put this multi-use path or if we just leave the sidewalk or add another sidewalk. And the cost for these alternatives, it ranged between $2.1 to $2.5 million. And the main thing to take from this one here is that the cost was at least doubling for a multi-use path versus a sidewalk, and mainly because we're having to utilize retaining walls to stay away from really occupying front yards and causing major grading operations in front of people's yards. We can move to the next slide. So this is the typical section for the preferred alternative for multi-use path. Again, it's on one side of the road. We're utilizing the curb and gutter with a 10-foot multi-use path and retaining walls as we need them. The advantages for this curb and gutter is a traffic calming measure. It improves stormwater drainage. We will have to add a lot of stormwater improvement if we go with this, especially when we add curb and gutter. Retaining walls will be needed, as I mentioned, and this will accommodate bicycle traffic, which is a big plus. Disadvantages, it requires costly stormwater system upgrades, require retaining walls, and high cost when compared to sidewalk. Right-of-way versus and utilities and construction cost added to $2.28 million for this project. Next. Cherokee Road Sidewalk Funding Strategy. In the 2018 TSPLOST Project 12 Pedestrian Improvement Program, our current budget for the program is $10 million. We have expended some of that money so far on various design and minor projects we have available, as you see here. And if we go with the preferred alternative, and this alternative was recommended by the AIM committee, it's we will have good amount of money to tackle the next AIM projects that we are looking at and that Stephen has referred to earlier. In the next slide, we have a table showing the schedule for those projects. Just to let you know, they're in the works, and we are presenting today Cherokee because that's the first one we received the concepts from the engineer working on those. The next, we anticipate Jefferson River Road, and we'll be doing the same thing, comparing the cost for multi-use path versus a sidewalk. The work session scheduled for August 11, public engagement to be determined, and a concept approval. Tentative date is for October. The following, you'll see, and I don't have to read it here, for Riverbend Road, bicycle and pedestrian improvement. We're doing the same thing with a little bit more unique look at this one. We're coming up with some creative ideas to make this project more feasible given the length of it, and more attractive for and more practical for our citizens and in a way that it serves the public. So we're looking at dividing or presenting the alternatives, showing a different section at a division point located on Riverbend Parkway. So we'll look at Riverbend Parkway up to Call Station versus Riverbend Parkway down to Milledge Avenue, and the costs for sidewalk versus multi-use path and so on. Barber Street, multi-use path, it would be a bicycle and pedestrian improvement. That would follow in October for a work session, and then concept approval planned for December. Next slide. So the next steps for this project, as Stephen has mentioned, is public engagement. We have earmarked 2 weeks for that. We're working with Joseph to get that scheduled, present a virtual public forum, and seek some input and try to capture more audience than what we did first with our first attempts for public forums. A TSPLOST committee review is scheduled for July 27th, and concept approval agenda for September 1st. With that, I believe we come to the end of the slides, and I'll take any questions. Me and Stephen try to answer your questions.
Thanks, Ronnie. I appreciate it. I want to give Patrick an opportunity first, given that this is in his district, and obviously he knows the terrain very well. Patrick, you have any thoughts about this project?
It's mine and Mariah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So concept number 2, the Satterfield Park. You were mentioning that it's considerably more because of the construction of commercial property. And I know they're extending the warehouses over there. But is there any way we can work with, they may be completed, I'm not driven out there, but is there any way we can work with the construction that's going on at across the street from Satterfield Park?
Thank you for that question. I did check with our land development section. Since the sidewalk was existing, we typically don't require a contractor developer to upgrade the sidewalk for any reason. We just leave it. And with this one particularly, there was no request of such. And by the time I was putting this presentation together, the contractor has reached a point where they're actually going through a punch list items. So they were at the end of their development. The opportunity here was very little. And to my knowledge, there was I haven't driven this recently, but there was no replacement of any sidewalk. And it would be really an overreach and not typical for us to ask a developer to do something or to build something that was not there to start with.
Thank you.
No problem.
Mariah, anything from your perspective?
No, I do like the I guess what they're calling the preferred concept. In the way it seems like it's better for cyclists especially. So I don't have other feedback for it right now.
Any other questions about this item?
I have a couple of questions.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, I see the cost differentiation between the sidewalk and the multi-use path is pretty extreme. And I'm just curious about the trips per day on this road, the volume and speed, as far as like current cycling safety on it, and if there's any opportunity for some shoulder striping to better accommodate safe cycling on it.
I don't think this is a 45 speed limit. So share roads are not recommended per MUTCD to be painted on this road, as far as I understand. I'm speaking a little bit outside my field. This is a traffic engineering belief policy, and they make that decision. However, that's my knowledge. Stephen, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think that's you covered it. I would like to go back and clarify. So when we said preferred concepts, it's a little confusing because there was a preferred sidewalk concept. There's also a preferred multi-use concept. So out of the number of sidewalks that we looked at, this was the preferred one. And then out of the number of multi-use paths we looked at, this was the preferred one. Overall, the preference right now, at least brought to us by the Athens in Motion Commission, was for the sidewalk project, specifically because of the cost. And, you know, and so I just wanted to clarify that, make sure we were on the same page with it.
Yeah, I get that. And I'm just wondering, well, I didn't realize the speed is 45. Could we possibly take a look at the speed and lower the speed on this road? I would hope that once we put in some crosswalks and some RFBs, the speed might naturally lower, and also put in some curbing, it would lower. And I'm also wondering, so currently state law prohibits cycling on sidewalks, correct?
As far as I know, yes.
So I'm wondering if maybe we could ask our reps to allow some little local leeway in that in areas like this, where I presume the pedestrian volume on this stretch of sidewalk would be fairly low. And, you know, cyclists tend to be pretty conscientious when they come upon pedestrians. I mean, people bike on the sidewalk on Prince Avenue all the time. And they, you know, I've walked on this sidewalk as cyclists have come behind me and approached me, and they're conscientious and slow down and move around people and request folks to step aside. I believe that, you know, the occasional cyclist can share a sidewalk with, you know, pedestrians safely. And I'm just wondering if we could maybe pursue some exemptions to that state law where we can allow some more affordable infrastructure that can be shared.
We probably want to put that in our bucket as we approach the members of the delegation for coming up.
I don't foresee a full-on 10-foot multi-use path being necessary here, but I also don't think it's rational to prohibit cyclists from using this sidewalk. You know, just your leisurely cyclists who are taking a trip to the Lowe's from the nearby neighborhood or whatever. So yeah, that's something I'd like to bring up.
Melissa, you were asking about the prospective striping a moment ago. I don't know, Ronnie or Stephen, if either of you know what the roadbed width is here and if it would accommodate narrower lanes and thus the prospect of bike lanes as well.
I'm glad the question is asked, because this is a point that the AIM, Athens in Motion Commission, made. The alternative chosen gives the ability for us to build a rural section sidewalk, which has about 7 feet shoulder. And if we decide to widen this road and implement bike lanes, there's a possibility that we could do that with minimal impact to the sidewalk starting from Airport Road. The speed limit changes from 40 to 45 right after Morning View Drive. I went to Street View, just looked at it really quick. It's a bit confusing because you look at it first and then it tells you 40 down by the U-Pro storage, and then it said 45 after that. Just want to bring that to your attention. So I know that question was asked. But that's there's no room for striping. The lanes right now are 12 feet, a little bit shy of 12 feet. And let me look at the PowerPoint presentation, because I know we had the exact lane width shown. All right, they're 11 feet. I'm sorry. They're 11 feet, and that's including markings.
Okay.
So there's little to no room for doing anything, really.
Any more questions, Melissa, before I move on?
I think that's it. But yeah, I hope we do talk to our state delegation about some of these things. I've written some notes down.
Russell, do you have your hand up for this guy?
I did. The multi-use path is superior for all users, and if we have an opportunity to do it, I think we should do it. We can talk about changing state law. We have this on the table. My one concern, though, is 10 foot wide seems a little overkill. I mean, maybe we could save some money and make it 8 foot. Can you flesh out 10 foot? I was raised in a community with 100 miles of multi-use paths, and none of them were 10 foot wide. They were about 8 foot. So maybe we could save some money there, but maybe just, could you flesh out how we arrived at 10? I mean,
10 is the recommended width for a multi-use path, and Hillary could speak a little bit more. Is Hillary with us tonight? I
believe she is.
Hillary, would you like to answer?
Yeah, so 10 feet is what is recommended by, I think, both state law and MUTCD to be classified as a multi-use path. And 10 feet allows, so if you have someone in a wheelchair and two-way bike traffic, everyone can get around each other. You can do 8 feet in very constrained locations, but in general, 10 feet is what's recommended.
Thanks, Hillary. Sort of following up on Russell's kind of question, if we were to receive some other funding source and have funds available at some future point, whether that was in the near term and long term, would both of these sidewalks be in places where you could later expand to a 10-foot width?
It's hard to say. The rural section may not allow you to expand as much. It's really hard to say. Okay. Once you start widening the road or widening the sidewalk, you will end up with probably more cost just because you added more sidewalk that is closer now to homes, and therefore that requires additional grading, and everything right now in that area, it drains naturally, meaning in ditches, side ditches, and we're pushing those ditches in front of homes. So during the acquisition of right-of-way and easements, sometimes some homeowners may have something valuable to them. They may not be able to give us the easement we need, so we are forced to go back to the curb and gutter. Unless there is a specific direction from Mayor and Commission not to put curb and gutter where we said we want to do a rural section, then we have that flexibility that we often went back to curb and gutter. Sometimes there might be something we can't avoid. And in this situation, it is not the case. Like 5 Points area, we had to go back to the back of curb directly and build a sidewalk because of the impact to properties and homeowners that may have a tree that is valuable to them and other items or utilities. Adding another fee to an existing sidewalk would be the most applicable way is when we build an urban section with curb and gutter, and then we add additional sidewalk right next to it, and that may require us to put retaining walls at a later date, and that cost, yes, we will see it. Of course, you'll have to add inflation.
Thanks, Ronnie. Russell, do you want to follow up?
I just simply want to any perceived consternation about 10 feet does not prevent me supporting this plan according to the will of the commissioners that represent this area. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I had questions, Kelly.
Hey, go ahead, Tim.
I have my hand up too. Thanks.
So going back to the reason that the sidewalk is the preferred by AIM, I think y'all said, was mainly because of the cost differential?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess trying to look at this, and I know it's difficult because this project number 12, the TSPLOST project, has multiple sub-projects in it, in which the other ones we don't necessarily have a budget yet for. So, I mean, I definitely appreciate us trying to go with the cheapest option, leaving money left over. But at this point, we don't exactly know how much money we need to have left over for those other projects. At the same time, I don't want to necessarily wait for us to get budgeting and designs for everything before we move forward. But do we have any rough estimates on what the budget's going to be for Riverbend Road and Jefferson River Road, so we can understand if we need to save that $1.2 million, or if it makes sense for us to go ahead and spend it on a multi-use trail?
I believe your budget, looking at the budget and the work ahead of us, we know Barber Street will have multi-use path, and Barber Street by itself could consume all the budget for the multi-use path. And it all depends on how the other three projects pan out between costs for each one of those. If we end up utilizing any of that bike facility funding or program, which is project number 11, we're not discussing that project tonight. But however, I do have an Excel sheet for it. If you just wait a moment, and I'll look at it.
And while Ronnie's pulling that up, I would just say that Tim, as you're doing there, you're looking at big picture of what we could continue to do. There are Hillary can tell you the exact number, but there's quite a few projects in this tier 1 of Athens in Motion that as long as there's money, we will continue to keep going down the line and going. So even if we I want to have you look at it as far as these 4 projects being encompassing all of this TSPLOST fund. What I'd really say is, as long as there's money, we'll keep going down that list.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And yeah, that's helpful. I mean, just trying to put the whole thing together with the big picture. I think as obviously the sidewalk concept, I think y'all did a fantastic job utilizing existing infrastructure there to be able to minimize the cost. I mean, I think it's really good and it's a great project. My one big thing is, and just from knowing this side of town pretty well from living there for a few years, I could see this road being a connection to the Firefly Trail in Winterville, and there are also, therefore, connections to downtown, connections to the Greenway and stuff, if it was a multi-use trail. Getting down to Beaver Dam, you're getting close to downtown Winterville, where we're going to have the Firefly Trail going through there. And I would love to be able to connect this part of the community to all of that existing trail infrastructure. So that is the one reason that I do understand my other commissioners asking, like, if we could have a multi-use trail connecting Lexington Highway to the Firefly, or getting at least close to it. I know it doesn't get us all the way there. I mean, is there any possibility of that, of us being able to have future, I guess this is again big picture, but connecting this down Beaver Dam Road or further down Cherokee Road to get it into actual Winterville proper and to the Firefly?
Well, let me ask Hillary. Sorry, Hillary, what does the Athens in Motion plan speak to? Is there any connectivity that's proposed in that area that Commissioner is referring to?
Yeah, so all of Cherokee Road, all the way up to Winterville, it's a combination tier 2, tier 3 bike project. And I think one of the things that Athens in Motion Commission really went back and forth on with Cherokee was specifically that question over, we have a limited bike program budget left. And we know Lexington Road, for example, really needs a multi-use path, and it's a tier 1. And so it was just a very difficult decision to make over going ahead and spending that additional $1 to $1.5 million on a tier 2 Cherokee Road project that really might not see that full connectivity for 10 years. Because we don't know when we're going to get to those tier 2, tier 3 projects. So I don't think you're necessarily missing out on a connectivity opportunity. It's just we're doing the sidewalk, I would say, before the connectivity is ready for those bikes today, just based on the budget. And I think and when you look at like Cooper Road and some of those subdivisions there, they have connectivity straight to Lexington, where once Lexington gets that multi-use path, then they can connect over to Satterfield Park. And so that's kind of where you start building out that bike connectivity and seeing, it's not just about having high quality facilities, it's also about having high quality connectivity, and it's kind of trying to find that balance and relationship.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And it's great to know that, that the Athens Motion is kind of doing that larger, big picture, long game kind of thinking. And if this is what they're recommending, that's the way to go forward, then, and that's how Commissioner Parker and Davenport then I'm happy with this.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Hillary. Allison?
Thank you. This is a really great project, and I've got some questions because I kind of want to do both. I really liked the priority that started out on the sidewalk one, where we have adding a sidewalk on the park side, because obviously that's a destination and active priority there. And then where the route changes to the other side, was there an option that the sidewalk stayed on the Satterfield Park side all the way to Beaver Dam? That means we'd have a sidewalk on that right off the get-go for this amount of money, and that leaves the opposite side available to become a multi-use path without undoing a new sidewalk. So that where money comes available, whether it's our next TSPLOST or that sort of thing, it seems like that would leave the opposite side of the road with just that existing pink section of sidewalk that would have to be taken up for the multi-use trail. Was that ever talked about?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
So there's a cemetery that's right about 300 yards from where the don't quote me on the distance, but there's a cemetery about 300 to 400 yards, and there's property as well. So if we do it just on the northern side of Cherokee Road, the cost of purchasing land and there's a huge gutter in that field, and just the cost would be astronomical. Just do that northern side of Cherokee Road.
Okay. All right. Well, that covers that idea.
I think you just took the words out of Ronnie's mouth there.
Yeah, but thank you, Commissioner Davenport and Commissioner Wright. Yes.
That's why we have those eyes on those details, and that explains exactly why you crossed over where you did there versus staying on that side. Okay. I need to, I'm with you guys who already are saying, gee, I wish we could get this multi-use trail there, because it reminds me of what was wanted down on Barnett Shoals. Remember when we tried to do the bike lanes, and the community, I felt, wanted a multi-use lane for safety. And this is definitely giving safety for pedestrians, but it's not covering the bikes. But you guys have done a thorough job. I like us being able to have confidence in Athens in Motion's vetting of this as well. So I'll go with what you guys want up in that, Mariah and Patrick, what you guys prioritize. And their hands are up, and I'm done. Thanks.
Mariah and Patrick. Mariah, you're muted.
Always muted. It's my go-to. So I wanted to clarify, we were talking about preferred concepts earlier. I was expressing a desire for us to potentially pursue that multi-use path because of its amenities for cyclists. Though I understand some of the cost considerations that have been weighed here as well.
Patrick, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I just got a question on how. I think the Greenway, the North Dakota Greenway, that path is 10 feet or is it 12 feet?
12 feet.
Okay. 12 feet, okay.
Just to give you some kind of perspective, I've driven this quite a bit from Winterville kind of down to where the Lowe's now is, and sort of, I think, aligned with Tim's thoughts. I would love to think of there at some point being a multi-use path triangle where, one leg of the triangle is the Firefly Trail, another leg of the triangle is something parallel to Highway 78, and then the final leg is along Cherokee Road. Obviously, we're in a community where we have so many neighborhoods and so many segments of town that were built out in that post-war era when no sidewalk or path was conceived of. And so there's a lot of work to do. And of course, that's some of our cost challenge, is knowing that we've got these two buckets in the TSPLOST 2018, the bike and then the PED, but so many dozens of projects when you look at the Athens in Motion plan. I think we're all looking forward to seeing so much of this get off the ground. And it's hard to imagine just a few of them when we know that there are so many more that we do want to see. So any other questions? All right, Stephen, Ronnie, Hillary, thanks so much. We appreciate your help.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for having us.
All right. We're going to move on now to some examination of how the remaining funds in our SPLOST 2011 package could be spent. As the presentation is getting set up on the screen, you remember that as we prepared not only this fiscal year budget that we've just entered, but the prior fiscal year as well, we had to make some determinations about how to spend or not spend, in some cases, general fund dollars, knowing that we have some capital possibilities within the SPLOST program. And so I think Keith is going to walk us through that. Keith, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you and good evening, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to share this with you.
Keith, I think you're muted there.
Oh, sorry about that.
There you go.
Now I got to get the slide to advance. There we go. So we're going to, as Mayor kicked it off, don't need to really repeat that. We're going to go through where we are in the 2011 program, a little bit of history, what revenues we have left over, and then some recommendations for reallocating some of those funds, and then, of course, your questions on the material. So I think everybody knows, but the program kicked off in November of 2010. Collection started April 1st of 2011. And there's been a couple of times that we've been earning interest on those funds all along. Mayor and Commission has allocated some of that interest. And generally the interest earned is saved for the later projects, depending on, because we don't put escalation in the estimates, not knowing when those projects will be funded in certain tiers. And when in the past, we've always used the earned interest to help cover those projects late in the program, which we did in 2018 with the fire station and cooperative extension projects. Also in 2018, when the capital budget, general fund budget was approved, there was some projects that could be funded. There were capital requested projects that could be funded with SPLOST dollars. And so those were taken out of the general fund for the FY19 and a couple, as you see, for the FY20 budget. And so those were backfilled with SPLOST 2011 funds as well. Most of that was with funds that were left over from the jail project that finished under budget. And so I really just say that to know, so you know there is a precedent for what we're suggesting and what we're bringing forward as far as this recommendations tonight. And towards the end of the program here, we found out in February from the Department of Revenue that they were going to allow collections to run until the end of March, which they did. We received our final payment from them in late April. And then, of course, you approved your budget just a couple of weeks ago. The 2011 program overall, as you can see there at the bottom, we originally had, it was set up for a budget of $195,272,000. We ultimately received a little over $201 million, with, of course, $6 million extra. And we've earned interest of about $1.6 million for a total of close to $203 million. In total, what we have available for reallocation tonight is that we have about $916,000 left in unallocated earned interest, because we had 1.6 and then we put some towards the fire station and co-op. So we have about $900,000 left. We still have jail savings from the jail project of about 1.7. The charm project is finished under budget. And then the $6 million in excess revenue that we received. And so we have a total there of $8,767,000 and change to reallocate to SPLOST 2011 projects. So what we're going to talk about is staff's recommendation for that funding. Some of these are, I say staff recommendation, but they were also noted in the mayor's budget that was approved as those capital requested projects that now can be backfilled with SPLOST 2011 dollars. And then part of the other part of the presentation is also some projects that where we have seen some needs that could be funded with SPLOST 2011 dollars. and so we're bringing those forward as well. And there's a couple of projects that need some additional work where we started that we have a chance to improve upon what we've already done. So let's see. Well, I have lost them. There we go. So the first of the capital projects that was requested, Leisure Service had put in several capital requests for projects. There is one project within 2011 that can fund those multiple projects. So although it's all project 16 under 2011, because they had submitted them as separate projects, I'm sort of showing them that way to you tonight. And one of the things when we did this in FY19, when we used the SPLOST dollars to backfill the general fund projects, to keep the continuity of the way the SPLOST program had been presented in years past, although that money was backfilling capital projects, it was now in SPLOST, so we were following the SPLOST process. So we were bringing back project concepts to Mayor and Commission for each of those sub-projects that the money was funding, which ultimately then delayed those projects getting implemented because we were going back through that Mayor and Commission process. Most of what these projects are funding in this cycle have already been as far as the types of work and it may just be at a different park, but largely so they're the same types of work, just at different locations. So in this round, in the agenda report, you'll see what we are asking for is not only the budget amendment to move the money into those projects, but to go ahead and declare the scope of work that we're putting forward as the project concept and allow those to move immediately to construction following the normal Athens-Clarke County purchasing and policies. So the first group of projects is Leisure Services is non-building facilities. I've shown a couple of images. You've got some tennis courts, basketball courts, pickleball that need to be resurfaced. Generally, those need to be done every 5 to 7 years. If you don't do them, if you remember, we did about 7 years, some of the courts at Bishop Park, and that was the first time they had been done in about 15 years, and the cost was probably 3 times what it would have been had they been maintained over a regular course of the cycle. But so just like asphalt on your roadways, the courts need to be resurfaced to be maintained to make them last longer, and hopefully ultimately spending less money on them long term and still keeping good usable surfaces for those. So I haven't shown you pictures of every individual thing, but we've got the courts. There's netting that goes around the fields to protect visitors that are outside of the field from flying either softballs, baseballs, soccer balls, and also to keep the equipment from getting lost. As you can see, there's several of those parks that need that. There's fencing replacements that are needed at various parks, ball field restoration. The FY19 money we put forth did 3 of the fields at Satterfield, and there's still a couple left to do. And then Southeast Clarke Park also needs some restoration work on those. And then playground replacement at Holland and Southeast Clarke. Same project, just some other examples of work. There's some places where we need some new signage. We've got some new park entrances there on Hawthorne and to Bishop Park that don't have any signage. And then we've got some pictures there you see of the decayed signage. Probably most of this signage was put in right after unification. It does reference the unified Athens-Clarke County, and I can just tell from the way it is, most of those are probably from right after that. They've got rot. They do need to be replaced. Scoreboards, we've got baseball scoreboards that are on soccer fields. They don't show all of the things that you'd want to have. And then now we can get them with LED lighting. And in many cases, the wiring after 20 years of use, it needs to be replaced. So we can get them wireless and LED now. We got some score stands that are wood. Those are probably 25-plus-year-old structures that need to be replaced and brought up to date. And there's a couple things. There's some new windscreens and shade structures. I mean, at a couple of parks, Southeast Clarke and is, I think, new shade structures. Bishop is replacements, and then windscreens on different fields and courts as well. The second project that Leisure Service had put forth in the capital budget was for their equipment replacement. Again, this was one that was very similar to what we had done in FY19. They have various pieces of equipment around the system that needs to be replaced. You know, not every grill is replaced every year, but over the course of years, these different items wear out. They need a fund to do that, to replace those, and that's what this would do. The third sub-project here that would fall under the park facilities was actually a project that was submitted by Central Services. This is for part of their capital life cycle projects. I think they had a request of over $3 million for FY20 for those. I don't believe any of that $3 million was funded, but there's only a portion of what they had submitted that actually fits within the project descriptions for SPLOST 2011. One of them, again, is the park facilities. And primarily, this project, for the most part, is replacing the roofs on the Bishop Park and Lay Park community centers. We believe both of those are original. We know they're 30 plus years old, and they're in need of replacement. There's also some various HVAC equipment at different locations. Again, those do need to be replaced. And it's on the Central Services list. It's some repainting of the exteriors of buildings and carpet replacements. Again, it's one of the things within their list of general fund projects that does fit within the SPLOST 2011. And this would be specific to buildings within the park system because it has to meet that project statement for Project 16. So those are the three that fall within Project 16. One of the other capital that Central Services requested falls within Project 3, which is fire safety equipment and protection services. That statement allows for capital improvements at any of the fire stations, and one of the biggest needs they have and highest priorities for them is replacing a 30-plus-year-old emergency generator at station number 1. Originally, this was in need of FY19 being replaced, but there was a lot of discussion about possibly relocating Fire Station 1 as part of the SPLOST 2020 project. Now that we don't think that's the case, we really need to get that generator replaced to keep it functioning. Even if 5 years from now somebody said, okay, we are going to relocate that building, you could still pick the new generator up and move it to whatever new facility that you put in. So it would not be a waste. And we would expect a new generator would have at least a 20-plus year life cycle, particularly since Facility Central Services does a robust maintenance program on them. They can keep those things running for longer than their normal service life. But this one is exceeded that. So. Okay. One of the other projects that Central Services put forth in their list is the replacement that fits within a 2011 project is the library improvements. And it is for about $400,000. And it is primarily to replace the metal roof that was on the original library structure before we did the expansion in 2010. That roof at that point, there wasn't enough money in the 2005 project to replace this roof. And frankly, 10 years ago, it wasn't nearly as bad as we knew the need to replace it was coming. We could see the rust and there really wasn't much we could do about it, but there wasn't money in that budget for it. So I think Robert Baird actually started requesting this roof to be replaced in FY15. But it just hasn't, it's been one of those that hasn't been able to get funded. And the rust is so bad, you can actually see it from Google Earth images. Those double rows of black spots on the roof are rust that's coming through from where it was the fasteners for it. So it really needs to be replaced. There's not another funding source within the general fund really for that. And so we think 2011 money is a good source for that. There's a high likelihood that we'll be able to get about half of that cost replaced. Reimbursed from the Georgia Public Library system. They have a robust grant system for maintenance, repair, and replacement items at the different libraries across the state. We've been very successful in years past getting some of the work. You know, they contributed $2 million to the library expansion as part of that. And then, but we've also, as we've done other things at the library, been able to get a lot of that submitted for a 50% reimbursement. And we have every reason to believe that would fit within this as well. The other part of this project is replacing some HVAC equipment to the IT room. Again, that was original HVAC equipment that in 2005, when we did that renovation, it wasn't in need of replacement, but it is today. Okay, and the last one that was submitted, I think, is a capital budget request is the PMP, the pavement maintenance program funding for about $600,000. When that wasn't included in the general fund, I think it was listed or noted in there somewhere that it would be coming out of SPLOST 2011. The contract that was approved for this year, this calendar year, for that paving, and the change order that was just approved a couple of nights ago for that funding is all based on the assumption that this particular budget amendment for the $600,000 is going to be approved and made part of that funding for this year's worth of paving. So, okay. And the remaining projects are, I guess they weren't part of the capital request that I know of, but they are things that we see that are needed, and some of it, and this one in particular is one I think that was in the budget, was the funding for and the decision to add the emergency medical dispatch within the 911 system, and the addition of some additional staff for that. So to fill that need, there is space, as you can see, if you can see in the picture where the arrow is pointing within the existing 911 room, there is space available on the floor to put some extra workstations for that effort. So what we're showing is a schematic image of what that would look like. We'd add 2 more. The proposal is to add 2 additional workstations with their computer-aided dispatch equipment, radio systems, and that go with it, and also the 911 equipment that goes with receiving those calls to the individual person there at the station. And then, of course, the electrical data and all the other little appurtenances that go with getting those stations set up. So the budget for that is $550,000. That fits within the Project 5 project statement. Project 5 is also is the same project that provided the money, the funding for the CAD, the workstations that are there in the 911 center today. Those were replaced as part of that project. Okay. Animal shelter. This is probably one of the newest projects that we're bringing forth as a request, where we see a need of something needs to be done, and SPLOST 2011 is a funding source that could fund this project should you agree to it. When we did the renovation of the animal shelter to begin with, one of the things that we did, we added the 4 pens, as you can see in the picture on the right. We added 4 grass. Those are play pens, runs. People call them different things, but it's the place where the public or volunteers or people looking to adopt animals that are coming to interact with them, they use these pens to interact with the animals. So we added the 4 pens in the back. On the picture on the left, there were 3 gravel pens. Originally, we added 2 more. They were gravel. When we started that renovation, we left them gravel. I can tell you that from managing that project, I know that the user group really wanted to put artificial turf in all of those pens at the time, but the budget wouldn't allow it, partially because we did expand for the cat shelter, and there was just more needs than there was budget for it. So what we're looking at, we did sod the grass fields in the back. The thought was, based on the usage at the time, again, this was pre-renovation, that we'd be able to cycle a couple of those grass pens like you do with the dog parks, where we could open a couple of grass ones, leave a couple of closed, let them recover. Well, the facility is well loved. It's being used and getting a lot more visitors, I guess, than was expected. The sod's not holding up. They're not able to cycle those to allow for the recovery of it. So even, like I said, this is even a Google Earth image. You can tell that the grass is not keeping up with recovering. So we've got muddy areas when it rains, dirt areas. And so it does require frequent maintenance to try to get those areas, grass growing in them. So what staff is asking is to replace both of the pins in the back and the pins in the front. Take the grass out, take the gravel out, and put in artificial turf. It is a product or products. There's multiple versions. I just showed some images and a cross section there for, in case you were interested, how it was built. There's multiple products we could go out to bid for. The image on the left is sort of a cross section through one of the particular manufacturers that's out there, but it would be a artificial turf grass that is specifically built for canine activity. It's got a drainage aggregate base underneath it, and then just normal your ground surface underneath that. So it comes with good warranties. It's used in a lot of places for this kind of activity. It does allow for easier cleanup. It's a little more sanitary. You can wash it down if you have a dog that's sick and it's out there that you find out later something he's been infected or something you need to sanitize it. You can actually sanitize the pen versus grass. There's really no way to sanitize that.
Leaf blower? Sorry.
You could use a leaf blower on it. Not early in the morning or late at night, though.
Thanks, Keith.
All right. And so part of this project as well, as you can see, I'm going to go back a slide. When we did the original pins in the front, when we added those and rebuilt, because we knew they were gravel, and we had to take out some trees to get the parking a little larger. Most of the trees that we took out were probably 90+ foot pine trees that were at or near the end of their life and really were providing a lot of danger to the structure. There were several that had been blown over in recent storms. So a lot of those trees that were close to the building were removed. We planted some new ones, and we put shade structure in the front to kind of replace the trees that we had to take out until the new trees mature. What they've done in the back is really a temporary tarp with a pole in the middle, trying to provide some shade to the users in the back, because we all know how it is in Georgia in the summer. It's hot. And so what we would propose is similar to what's in the picture on the right, probably different colors, maybe even different shapes, but add some shade structures as well at the same time to the pins in the back. If you're going to add a shade structure, if you're going to do turf, you need to do the shade structure first. Otherwise, if you come back a year from now and say, well, we decided now we want the shade structures, then you've got to go back and redo the turf. And you're going to pay to somebody else, the subcontractor, to come back out again and tear up what you just put in to do the structure and then replace it. So we're recommending that. We think we're confident we can get that done for $250,000 with some contingency still in there. And as with any of these, if there's money that's left over when this work is done, that would come back to you as well for reallocation again on another project. Another one is this one is completing one of the SPLOST 2011 projects. I added, well, there's some history in the agenda report, but just so everybody that wasn't on the commission when we went through this the first time, the Project 20 requires sprinkler systems to be added in 5 different buildings, historic buildings owned by Athens-Clarke County. City Hall, Civic Hall, the Darty Street Government Building, Old Fire Hall number 2, and then the Church Brumby House, or the it's used as a welcome center. We did that work, or bid that work, in the height of the recovery, and bids were pretty high. I think primarily because we have to keep all the buildings open and occupied during the day, and so work was having to be done at night, and also the fact that they're historic structures that have to be restored. When you put the piping in, you've got to come back and do restoration work. So there was an adequate budget in the project at the time to do the Fire Hall number 2 or the Church Brumby House, and so what we're recommending as part of this project is to go back and do those 2 buildings. We believe the way the Attorney Drake has let us know that the way the project statement is written, these 2 buildings, something has to be done for these 2 buildings as part of that project statement. The sprinkler systems have to be added in some way. So the budget that we've put here, those are 2 very small buildings, and I know that this is a very high budget based on the square footage. We're hopeful we can get it in underneath that. The budget I put in is based on the bids that we got 3 years ago when we did the other 3 buildings. The way the economy is today, hopefully we can get a little bit better price. But these are 2 of the buildings that have some of the tightest and toughest working conditions to deal with, to get them and keep them open every day. We also have to bring water to both buildings from across the street. We have to come across Darty Street for the Church Brumby building and Fire Hall. The street escapes me. The street to the back side, not Prince, the one on the other side of it. We have to come across that street with the water line, so that also increases the cost per square foot a little bit. Again, if any of this money is left, which I certainly hope that there's a large portion of this left, that could be reallocated to other projects at that time. And stormwater, this is the, I went ahead and added a little bit extra history on this project. This really, in 2018, in February, Transportation and Public Works brought forward a list of 26 project concepts that Mayor and Commission approved or adopted for live stream pipe replacement. Those were valued at about $16 million, but there was only $1.5 million budget to do that work. And again, in December of 2018, there was a further list, and Mayor and Commission a presentation, and Mayor and Commission at that point suggested that half of the cost of that $22 million at that point to do these live stream replacements should be looking at SPLOST funding. At that point, I think we were it was still hopeful that we might be in the SPLOST 2020, and then the other $11 million would come from Stormwater Enterprise. So right now we have about $500,000 left in the Stormwater Project 27, but most of that's been allocated to the Charlie Bolton Road replacement project. And we do have the 2020 project, but it only has a budget of about $500,000. And I know in the 2020 program, there's a hope that if we have project savings, some of that could come back and be put back in that project, but that's years down the road. The TSPLOST does not have stormwater improvements in it at current, but that we do have a TSPLOST coming in. The next one would be in 2022. So hopefully there's some stormwater dollars will get put in that. But in order to try to bridge that gap, we're suggesting that of the money that's available today, that maybe $2 million of that get moved to Project 27 to be available as stopgap funding for these live stream pipe replacement projects. the list that you see on this screen, that's the list of those projects that Transportation Public Works believes are the ones off of the list of 26 that are the closest or the most imminent for actual collapse. They're already rated as being in a failure mode, but the action of collapsing hasn't occurred yet. These are the ones that they believe are the most pressing. And you can see that's even without contingency, that's over $4 million. We're suggesting that $2 million of this extra funding be put towards that, if nothing else, to help stopgap till the SPLOST 2020 or the next TSPLOST vote in 2022 comes. And finally, cost of building renovation, we've been talking about for months, and we've, I think as far back as when we first mentioned the cost, we suggested that we set aside $1 million of the Dexter jail funding. And so we're still suggesting that you set aside $1 million for that, but not to do the budget amendment yet. Wait until the construction award comes. That number could be more or less than that $1 million. And it depends on what the final use is determined for that, and whether or not we have any other partners at the time of construction award that are bringing some capital money to the project as well. So I'm not suggesting you move that money, but that we at least continue to set it aside. So with all of that, if all of that is done, you still have about $1.4 million left over that could be allocated in the future. And it could be there for contingencies for other projects, or if there's something else that comes up that you have a need for. So just to recap, we had $8.7 million total available for reallocation. There's about a little less than $3 million of that is capital budget request that fit within the 2011 program. Then there's about $4.4 million that are other projects to complete either the original scope or that could be expanded within those projects. So that's a total, and that's still holding that $1 million for Costa. 7.3 leaves you with the 1.4 available for contingency. So our next steps, we are bringing forward an agenda item in this cycle. It is I know it's it's been a long presentation. It is a long agenda, but it does include these budget amendments as well as asking for approval of all these project concepts so that we can move them straight into construction phase and get them done quickly. And with that, I'll open it to questions.
Thanks, Keith. I appreciate it. Obviously, there was quite a bit of component pieces there, but so much of this manages to allow us to maintain quality facilities and not see them further degrade, and manages some of these anticipated but sometimes time-sensitive matters like those live stream replacements that many folks here on the commission have had in their districts or in their neighborhoods. I will say, just on kind of our front end pitch, it's certainly my hope that a lot of these projects come in under budget, and with some of those larger area items, like with the cost of contingency and the remaining funds, that we are able to direct that to completion of the Firefly Trail between the currently completed component that we've approved and then the final stretch in Winterville. So I'm going to go ahead and go down the line. Patrick?
Yeah, first of all, thanks staff for doing the numbers. It's really cool and grateful. Can you go back to project number 5 with the E911? So the $550,000 to add 2 desks and some computers seems a little high to me, but I'm technologically disadvantaged. So can you explain? Can you break that down for me?
Sure. I don't have a detailed estimate tonight that I can give you, but I can tell you these desks are a lot more expensive than you think. You do have to keep in mind the desks are not probably the bulk of the $550,000. But the desks are fairly expensive. They are electric that they can raise and lower to allow staff to either sit or stand and to move in between the two and continue working so that during their shifts they have a chance to move around. There are multiple computers that go with each one. As you can see, there really is 5 screens, 5 or 6 screens that they are using at all times when they're doing that. We have to pay for some additional software licenses for the radio equipment that goes to each one, as well as the 911 equipment that goes to each one. We also have to do some additional electrical work and data runs back to the server rooms. And so all of that together, we also have to upgrade some of the 911 equipment for the extra stations. So all of that factors into that 550.
So we'll be saving our E911 funds then.
From SPLOST 2020?
21. Not SPLOST, FY budget, FY 21 budget.
So Patrick, I think you're referring to funds in the final approved budget that would be drawn from the 911 capital line item.
Yeah.
Yeah, Manager Williams.
Yeah. I
understand that there are several funds that will be layered in kind of ultimate rollout of the program. Is that the case?
Yes. The funding, so the 911 is a special revenue fund because we do receive, as you know, there's a charge on the bill, of each phone bill. And so that money goes in there. And I remember the discussion that Commissioner Davenport, maybe Commissioner Denson was having, that there was a slight fund balance in the fund. And I think some of that, we've been spending it down over time. What we're doing is we're using some of the 911 funding for the addition of the new positions that you approved, but we were augmenting that with some general fund dollars as well. So Commissioner Davenport, whether it comes from general fund capital to buy this equipment or the 911 fund, you are correct. The SPLOST funds are helping to avoid spending that in those two areas.
Okay. And one final question about the cost of the library, $400,000. You mentioned that we get 50% from grant, possibly. Is the $400,000 considering the 50% reimbursement, or we will get $200,000 back?
Correct. The $400,000 does not assume we're getting the grant. That's the cost of the work. The grant is a reimbursement. We do the work, we submit, and we may or may not get approved. We have a good rapport with the person who does these, and we have every reason to believe that we would get it. So if we do, that $200,000 would come back to us, and it would come back to the SPLOST project, and Mayor and Commission could reallocate that $200,000 somewhere else.
All right, thank you.
If we get it. And it could be that we get 20% instead of 50 or 25%, some number, but we believe I can't say for sure, but we just have every reason to believe that we could get the reimbursement.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Keith.
Yes, sir.
Mariah?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given that a lot of these projects, as you mentioned, with the library improvements, as well as some of the animal shelter improvements, are likely to end up coming out under budget. And the fact that initially the project concepts or the project line items are all approved by the public, I was wondering if it would be possible that the contingency funds and unspent interest could be allocated through some sort of participatory process, going back out to the public to see what they'd like these funds spent on and being able to decide projects that way?
Well, I would just say that the SPLOST is limited to, we have to spend them within the eligible categories that were approved.
Make room in the input for that clarification. But it just feels kind of weird that like people approved a certain set of goals, and now that we have this leftover money, we are deciding how that's going to be spent rather than going back to the public and seeing what they think is most important. And I realize a lot of these projects are very necessary things we do need to move ahead on, but things that, expenses that aren't currently accounted for, why not ask the public what they'd like to see with those dollars?
So the process that we're following now is no different than it has been for this. this is a normal process where we come back to the mayor and commission with leftover funds, and within the categories that the citizens did approve. And part of this too, as Keith pointed out, was some things that I think the mayor and commission decided to forego in the capital with the intent of reimbursing from the SPLOST.
Okay.
So
for the, I can't remember the exact amount, $1.4 million that's left over. Like,
yes.
How will we eventually decide how that's spent?
In the same fashion that we would come back to you with some suggestions, and this will ultimately come to you in the form of a agenda item. And if there are different ways that you want to spend it, you can do a CDO as well.
Okay, I will do that. Yeah, I mean, I just was wondering if there's anything impeding us from issuing a survey or doing something like we've done with the TAD process to get feedback from folks about how they want that unencumbered allocation to be distributed for projects.
Go ahead, Keith. I'm sorry.
Well, the only thing I was going to add was we will be taking these to the Citizens Advisory Committee for their concurrence that they do fit the description. But then that money that is left would come back again for the same kind of process.
Okay.
One small note on that I'd make is that I think it was just in the last year that we expended the remainder of our 2005 SPLOST dollars. So sometimes this is a accordion style extended program.
I have a couple of questions. I don't know if you can see my hand.
Go ahead, Melissa.
So there you talked about some fencing replacement in Bishop Park. I'm wondering if that entails the fencing along Hawthorne Avenue. Anyone? Or do you know that? Do you have any details?
I could chime in, Keith, on that one.
Okay.
Ken. Okay, Ken.
Yes, thank you for the question, the opportunity to speak. Absolutely, it does not. We would like for it to, but that stretch of fencing is extremely costly to do that. So this is more of the interior fencing, some of the backstops that are in bad shape, and some of the fencing around our courts and fields, in basketball court as well. So it's doing some replacements around there, but Hawthorne in itself is a significant capital project.
Well, I'm wondering if just the simple removal of that fencing isn't a feasible thing, considering that it's a really thick hedge. And part of the reason it's so unsightly is because you've got the hedge grown up all in the rusted chain link fencing.
Correct.
Is there a reason why we need fencing there, even though you have a nice fat hedge?
There is gaps at the base of that hedge where a smaller child could get through it. And in the seconds it takes them to get through those gaps, they could be in that road instantly. We have, when we presented for SPLOST 2020, a plan for Bishop Park. It included removal of that fence and a total re-landscaping along Hawthorne, along with a nice walkway that allows for a more attractive view into that park. And we're already improving the access on both corners of that park. So that was part of that project. We still have this desire that with the money we have in SPLOST, which is primarily focused on the pool and aquatic features, if there's any of it left, we would like to begin that process with SPLOST 2020 money. How far it'll go remains to be seen.
Okay, thank you. And while I've got you, Kent, what is a windscreen? They mentioned windscreens. What precisely is that?
If you've seen the screens on tennis court, that along the tennis courts, it's both a visual barrier as well as the wind barrier that starts to kick up on courts. So they're along backstops on baseball fields. Sometimes it's that visual barrier so people aren't standing up against the fence. And as you're on the mound pitching or you're playing, you're staring at a group of people. The same principle also applies in tennis. If you've got a lot of people gathering around the courts, that can be distracting.
Okay.
So those screens are there, and there's tiny holes in them that allows that wind to go through it.
Okay, yeah, I know what you mean now. And I just had a comment. I had a comment about the signage. I noticed the degraded signage. I'm wondering if this replacement cost includes signage that would last longer, made of metal or stone or something like that, so we don't have to go through this again in 20 years, or even is that what the cost entails?
Yes, that's an excellent point. If you've seen some of our recent entrance signs at our newer parks, and even some of the ones we placed in older parks, there's stonework there now, and then there's a panel that puts the name of the park up, and then we are able to just exchange that panel when the time comes for its age. It's past its life cycle, and the age starts to show the wear and tear. But the stonework should last for ages and ages to come.
Yeah,
Costing us
that
a
was
little
my
bit
next
more
question
money.
About the names, because we do name. Some of our parks don't have proper names, and so making it changeable, more easily changeable, rather than replacing the whole signage.
And that's our standard now. Yes.
Okay, good to know. I had some questions about the library roof. It's a 26-year-old roof, and by everything that I know about, I've replaced my roof recently, and even low-grade shingle roofs have a 30-year lifespan. Why is this roof already degrading?
Well, I wasn't here when it was put in, but I can say that the analysis of it is that it probably when it was done 26 years ago was not done correctly. Probably was not the right design for that. Unfortunate.
Or the fasteners seem to be leaking.
Yeah, it's like
they used defective fasteners.
My guess is it probably didn't have the right separation, two different kinds of metals, and didn't have the right separation in them, and so it's degraded out. It's unfortunate. That's what it is. You're right. A new metal roof should last 50 years, and that's what we would be targeting for that roof. The other positive comment about that roof that I didn't mention is that that will then allow solar to be added to that roof. Currently, we wouldn't.
That was my next question.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that. It is high on the sustainability office for potential for solar on the roof, but because of the bad condition of the roof, they don't want to do that, because then they'd have to take it off to replace the roof. So once that new roof is on, it moves up to top of the list.
Okay, good. Yeah, because that was my next question. And I thought perhaps we could talk about the, possible extra leftover money if we do get that state grant funding to use towards solar. Or, I guess we do have a significant sustainability fund for that. But these funds would qualify as well if we chose to use these funds for that library, correct?
Yes, we could use these funds to pay for solar if that was what Mayor and Commission directed us to do for the library.
Okay, so we have that choice possibly.
Right. There's also a sustainability project in 2011 that could be used as well. Sorry.
Okay, good. And I do have some questions about the animal shelter. I have issues with artificial turf. I know that from an environmental perspective, it's not ideal as it degrades. It can, it leaches into the groundwater, and there's some toxins in some of them. And I'm wondering if these funds could instead be used to add additional pens with turf, so that it would allow for those that rotation and allow for that grass to grow back. Have you looked at that option?
We have that. It is certainly an option. You still end up with your maintenance cost for the grassing of mowing and maintaining. I'm not sure 250 would be enough to get all of the grading and stormwater that would need to be done for expanding that area. There is some significant grade changes outside the fence barrier that we have today that you can't see in all that overgrowth. But we would have to do, clear the area and fence it and regrass it. And it'd probably be comparable in cost, in capital cost. But then you still continue to have maintenance of the grassing. So
Could you go into the wooded area with some penned areas? I mean, I mostly, when I take my dogs off leash, I do it in a wooded area so it's nice and shady. It would be nice to have pens that are actually in a wooded area, and there are wooded areas around there. I don't know how much of the property is actually ACC property.
There is a good bit of ACC property around it, and there certainly is. There's an abundance of actual property that ACC owns. The boundary for this actual facility is just outside the fence line. One of the things that we had to do when we did the renovation project to begin with was originally the property for the animal shelter continued from where it is today all the way up, included that open field where the old K9 training was, up by the airport. But if we had kept that as a single piece of property when we did the project originally, we would have had to have provided sidewalks all the way along both sides or along the road. And that was that was more than the cost of the project itself, just about. So we did subdivide the property. So we would have to go outside of the current boundaries to do that. And we would have to, the trees that are outside the fence line aren't really shade trees. They're scrubs. They're probably, most of them are very under 20 feet. That area was clear cut and timber harvested off of it years ago and hasn't regrown yet. So that you wouldn't get any shade out there. You would need to clear it and grass it.
What is the zoning out there? Is it industrial zoning? Because I know we changed our sidewalk requirements not too long ago to no longer require sidewalks in industrial zone new construction.
Well, I'd have to look that up, but I think it might be government, but I'd have to check.
And is government zoning subject to that sidewalk requirement?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I just like a little more information on that animal shelter project and some cost comparative regarding adding 2 or 3 new pens versus the turf, and also some details on the product, the turf product.
Okay, I don't know the exact product because we'd put it out to bid and we would take multiple bids for the different types of products.
So there's been some research done on what might qualify. I mean, if I could just get some links to some of the product that's out there.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, everybody. Mayor Gertz is lost his connection, so I'll stand in his stead until he's able to get back with us. So anybody else with questions for Mr. Sanders?
Mayor, I had a question, if I could, please.
All right, go for it.
Thank you. So yeah, I definitely appreciate this. Is really good, and I think we're definitely finding some money that for things that sometimes fall between the cracks here and don't get funding, especially like stormwater improvements and stuff. But I see on the number 26 road and bridge improvements. So that $600,000 there is entirely going to pavement maintenance. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it's actually going to the pavement maintenance contract for calendar year 20.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And yeah, so I'd be curious if my colleagues would be interested, and I'd be willing to work on a CDO. I know that need is there, but I also need to know that there's a drastic need for our sidewalk gap project, which again, when we compare how much money goes to the pavement compared to ped and bike programs, I mean, in TSPLOST, it was $25 million compared to $11 million for pedestrian. And the SPLOST 2011, this one here is $15.8 million compared to 5.2 for pedestrian, with only 3.9 of that going to sidewalk gap. So I would really be interested in us maybe splitting that money there and having $300,000 go into our sidewalk gap fund, so that we could tackle some of those sidewalk gap projects that I know every single one of us have in our districts, and possibly be able to work towards something like what Commissioner Hamby and the late Commissioner Neesmith were bringing up with the Atlanta Highway Corridor, the idea of sidewalks on Timothy and Mitchell Bridge. So I would be interested in working on a CDO that will pull some of that funding and put that towards the sidewalk gap project of SPLOST 2011.
Well, Mayor Pro Tem, may I ask a question for clarification?
Sure.
Keith, did I hear you say that this $600,000 that's being proposed tonight is dedicated for the current contract that we're in on calendar year 20? Is that correct?
That is correct.
So Commissioner Denson, we can do exactly what you'd like to do, but we're going to have to find the funding to satisfy the contract from another source. And Stevens is still on the line, and Keith, I want to make sure I'm not misstating that. That was my understanding.
That is correct. It was part of the funds that were anticipated when that contract was approved, as well as the change order that was approved Tuesday. It was in the funding line item.
So it was in the general fund capital, but that got moved out when y'all used some other priorities with the idea that the SPLOST would replace it so we could go ahead and finish this program. Is that correct, Keith?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So was this in the mayor's recommended budget? Is that what?
It was.
Yes.
Okay. I'll be happy to explore that, and we can, yeah. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else on the SPLOST stuff? Okay, let's move right along. Manager Williams, do you want to get going on the TAD presentation, sir?
Can we take a little break, Russell?
Sure.
Just a quick 5 minutes, and maybe Mayor Gertz can get back on. And
yeah, no, that's fine.
I know the TAD one's probably going to be a while.
Yeah, let's. Yeah, okay, we can take 5.
Even 5. Thank you.
Right, take 5.
Y'all just
We are back at the Mayor and Commission work session of July 9th. We haven't quite entered zombie territory yet, but we had some technical malfunctions, and we were discussing some components of the SPLOST 2011 program financial update. And so I think the last set of questions I heard were from Commissioner Link, who was discussing some of the fencing at Bishop Park. Any other questions about this matter? All right, I guess we're ready to move on to the next presentation, which is the next phase of development of our tax allocation district program in Athens.
Okay. Mayor, Commission, I'm going to, myself and Joseph D'Angelo, our geospatial information officer, are going to present tonight on tax allocation districts. The purpose of our presentation tonight, and I will do the first and the fourth bullet, describing the TADs, the benefits of using them. Joseph's going to cover a preliminary evaluation of possible redevelopment areas for consideration. He's already done some analysis and modeling on what Mayor Gertz presented or suggested that you heard about in late May. We'll tell you a little bit about he'll also tell you about the public input process, and then I'll go into next steps and feedback from any that you have. So tax allocation districts, or TADs is the acronym, is really a redevelopment tool. And what it does, it focuses on property taxes. And so if you go through the process of creating a TAD, there's a baseline created of the current tax value. And so that baseline continues to generate property taxes for the general fund and for the school district. But after you set the baseline, any growth in that and that specific geographic area, which you would approve, would generate a positive increment. So an extra amount that would be dedicated for purposes that you would approve as part of the TAD, and going with the goals that you would set for the TAD. And these are redevelopment powers that were given to you by the state of Georgia. And so TADs are used across the state. They're probably most that we've, there's probably more in Atlanta than anywhere else. Other states are called tax increment financing, or TIF, but it's the same concept either way. So in order to help, just to give you a graphic that would explain this, if you look at this slide in the shape in the middle, the area that has the 1 in it, so that's the existing value of an area that you would designate as a TAD. And so you would set the baseline, and so the funds that really are 1 continue to come to the government like they always have. But 2 would represent the growth over time after you'd set the baseline and created the TAD, so that those funds that represent the area of 2 would be dedicated for those purposes that you approved the TAD for. And then when you set a TAD, you set it for a specific purpose. As you'll see, and as we'll go through the rest of this year in setting the TAD up, there'll be specific costs that are called out that you intend for the funds, the extra funds, this extra increment to be spent towards. And then that will run for so many years. There's a finite term to the TAD that you would decide. So once the TAD is done what it's supposed to do, and again, remember, it's for the basis of redevelopment. So if redevelopment occurs, then you not only have the catalyst projects that you hope to spur on, but it also, other growth happens as well. And so once the TAD wears off, then what 3 represents is the baseline plus the new growth that would then be coming back to the school district and the unified government. So some of the benefits, and I'm going to speak here about the but-for. It's a tool that that traditionally you use in areas of the community that needs some additional incentives or vehicles to help encourage redevelopment. And that could be site-specific issues, but what you're looking for is creating some long-term benefit to not only that specific area, but the community in general. You can use it for public infrastructure. You can use the funds for any number of things. The state came back and revisited the law some years ago and added more eligible uses for the funds. If you do attract if you cause new catalyst redevelopment to happen and you encourage some peripheral redevelopment, not only does the property taxes there increase, but if commerce increases, then sales taxes as well. And so you can do all this by using this, by dedicating a future stream of funds that may not otherwise would have happened had you not used this tool. And I think that's what a lot of communities have found. And so I want to talk about the but-for test. And there's a lot of words here, and of course this is posted so folks can read this. But let me tell you what it means to me, and that is that you use a TAD, and when you talk, and we can talk about the different types of TADs here in a minute. But when let's say that you're using the TAD as an incentive and you're talking to a developer to come in, you really want the TAD to be, this would not happen but for the TAD's participation. Okay, if it's going to happen anyway, you don't need to use the TAD. But if nothing's going to happen, then using it to stimulate development and growth and positive impacts and infrastructure improvements for the surrounding area, then it's a win-win for both parties. So this is what I'd like y'all to hear me here, because I've really had to think through this and talk to Dan McCrae, the gentleman that helped us last year, and he'll be helping us on the tail end of this process most likely. What you're being asked to do at the September voting meeting, and this will be only after tonight, and you get to hear from the public in the public input process, and then we'll come back to you the August work session to give you some more information. But in September, in order to meet the deadline of creating this TAD by the end of the calendar year, there's several decisions you're going to have to make. And one of those is the geographic areas of both the redevelopment area and the TAD, okay? And so the redevelopment area, you have to create that first. And a TAD could then, let's just say it's a series of parcels. The TAD could be the entire redevelopment area, or it could be a subset of that redevelopment area, okay? There's two types of TADs. One's an area TAD, which I'm about to talk about and the slide shows, and then there's a project-specific TAD, okay? So the area TAD is where you would take some or all of a redevelopment area, and that's one of your decisions that you'll be making in September is what parts of the county do you want to create redevelopment areas, which could then host TADs, okay? And then in September, you're also going to be asked to tell us what areas you want the TADs to comprise. And I'll tell you more about the process after that. An example of an area TAD is in Smyrna. And many of you have probably driven across here, and there's been a lot of redevelopment in Windy Hill. And this is one of those things that helped to spur that on. And so the area TAD doesn't have any specific deal with a developer at the outset. When they created this TAD, the local government said, we want this area broadly to redevelop. Here are some goals, and they had a redevelopment plan, which you'll have to do as well, that telegraph what those goals are. Here are some estimated expenses. Maybe they invested in sidewalks, maybe it was intersection improvements, maybe it was purchasing, we want to buy some property and use that as an incentive to attract developers. And so they basically said, in this area, any growth is going to generate some new funds. We're going to plow it back into infrastructure in the hopes to encourage redevelopment. Okay, and so that was successful for them there. It may help if I contrast that with a project-specific TAD, and there are many examples of this, but the one I come to is one of the very first ones, and that's Atlantic Station. And I asked Sarah to include this because I think we've all been there. And if you remember it, its past life was a brownfield. It was an old steel mill. And this was one of the first TADs Atlanta did, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe it didn't do everything they wanted it to do, but certainly it transformed, this vehicle helped to transform that property into what it is today. And so there was a developer involved, there's a developer involved, and you have a specific agreement with them. And remember the but-for clause. Okay, so the developer is coming to you and saying, we want to do this, but we're not able to do it unless you help us with these expenses. And I guess, for instance, and in my own experience, and it's anecdotal, but in Floyd County, where I managed, the city and the county created this broad redevelopment area, and they just left the redevelopment area there as a signal to developers that they were willing to work with them. And a developer initially was going to build a hotel. That fell through. A follow-up developer came and wanted to build a retail center. And what they said was, we're going to cap this old municipal landfill with a parking lot that's going to serve our center. But we can't do this. It doesn't make financial sense for us to do this unless you help pay for the parking lot. But for your assistance with the parking lot, we can't improve this at all. So the win for the local governments was that the landfill was capped and any rainwater intrusion didn't further the spread of that. And then they were able to use the funds for to support their development. And that is there today. So the reason why I bring those two examples up to you is that Joseph's going to walk us through the areas that Mayor Gertz recommended to give you some initial feedback on what we found there. And we tried to come up with some ways to evaluate these areas and compare them to each other under different categories, and he'll explain all that. But at the end of the day, what's been proposed is one of the things that you can't do according to law is go beyond, create TADs that are beyond 10% of the value of the total digest. And right now, all those geographic areas that you're about to see in aggregate, I think, are in excess of 10%. So if you liked everything you saw tonight and you said, we want to go with that, it's still too much. So you're going to need to redefine these areas, and that's just the TADs. You can make the redevelopment areas as big as you want, but at the end of the day, the TADs cannot comprise more than 10% of the total value. And so you may want, and the mayor and I have talked about this too, you can always come back and do this process again. This isn't the only time in history, so you may want to do 1 or 2 this year. You may want to do all 6, but only create 1 or 2 TADs. You may want to have an area TAD, or you can have a hybrid. And I know that's confusing, but there are several different variables here. And Commissioner Davenport, I think you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you, Blaine. I have 2 questions. So let me get this right. So for the area TAD, when it comes to a redevelopment plan, how long does a redevelopment plan take? Do it take like years to do? Is it, because we're thinking about doing this by the end of this year, correct? And if a redevelopment plan takes some studies, some analytics, what is the thought process or the procedure behind that?
That's a great question, Commissioner Davenport, and that really does provide some good information for the public and the rest of your peers. So you will generate goals, and you will generate some initial projects for an area TAD. You might say, well, we want to improve pedestrian connectivity here, and it could be any number of things. And you may come up with a figure of, we want to spend $2 million to do that. And when we get much beyond what I'm about to talk about, we're getting beyond my knowledge, and we'd have to ask Attorney McCrae. But what you don't know is how fast the property values are going to improve absent any type of specific deal. So it may, it could be a part of town that doesn't grow at all, and those funds really never come to fruition. You may say, well, we're going to give this a try for 10 years, and after 10 years, the TAD's going to go away. So there's no way to know. Now, I want to contrast that with a project specific. If a developer comes to you and says, if we can work something out, I'm going to invest $50 million, okay? And then at that point, and that can happen, y'all, with a redevelopment area that you've just assigned some goals to telegraph that you want somebody there. It could be in an area TAD that they come after the fact and you amend the plan. But when you have a specific deal on the table and the developer's willing to sign papers saying, I will invest this amount of money, then you know that the value of the digest will increase by that amount of funds. And oftentimes, and this is, you can sell bonds based on that promise and advance those funds through time to make the development a go. And then you use the increment that's generated from the tax digest increase to pay the debt service on those bonds. So you've created value immediately, and you deal with that over time, paying through the taxes that the actual development produces. And then that speeds the redevelopment of the area and grows the digest even further.
But a redevelopment plan does require like outside research or CAC, or is it just Mayor Commission?
So there's a couple things in this process, and that's one reason why we are suggesting September would be the last date at which you would approve these, because there's a great deal of work, and our staff really spent a lot of time last year trying to provide analysis that supports the redevelopment plan. So we have the expertise. Joseph and Mary and Sarah can help us with that. The other analysis, Commissioner Davenport, of note is there's analysis that for the feasibility for the school district and their participation, so that they understand what impacts this has as well. But it's your decision. It is your decision at the end of the day. The school district, of any property tax dollar that any taxpayer pays, about 60% of it goes to the school district roughly, and about 40% goes to unified government. It's helpful to have the school district agree to forego their additional revenue associated with the TAD, because then the goals that you've set for the TAD get done quicker. And then the quicker they happen, then the quicker it wears off, and then everybody gets the extra increment that's grown. So they can choose to either pledge their increment, so to speak, or not. But they are a partner in this, and but they don't approve or disapprove of your pledge of increment. That's your choice.
Okay. And final question, because I had, it kind of makes sense to me, but just explain to the general public, the TADs only use new tax revenue from the district. Can you go back to that graph?
Yes, sir.
So, perhaps a couple of constituents calling. So, pretty much, some constituents are thinking that their taxes will freeze at the number one. But I'm trying to explain to them that it will pretty much go 1, 2, and 3. It just the county would get the number 2, and then once the time frame for the TAD is over, everything goes. The school board and Clarke County gets number 3. It just how it's. I can understand how some people can get confused by that. Hopefully,
sure.
That makes sense. But can you just explain that to the general public?
Yes, it's an excellent question. So what one represents, and this is why this happens once a year that you certify TADs, because on January 1st of any given year, that is when the tax assessor sets the value for every property in Athens-Clarke County. And so the reason we work through the year to get to the January 1 is because January 1 sets the baseline snapshot in time. This is how much this area, whatever area you pick, that's what the digest is worth on January 1. And if it grows on January 2nd, that's the new increment. So it doesn't affect the taxpayer. It doesn't freeze their assets. It doesn't redirect any current taxes that they're paying. The current taxes that they're paying on December 31st, say, they still go to where they've gone, and that's the school district and the unified government. But any reassessments that occur in the area, any new development that occurs in the area, that generates a new increment, new tax dollars. Those tax dollars are captured in the plan that you put together, and they're put forth for those purposes. That we can't go back and you can't. we can't bring those to that unified government. They go for those purposes that you laid out.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, go ahead.
And to follow up with the I apologize. I've been having some problems with my WebEx, but I wanted to follow up with the school board. I did not know that the TAD was going to be part of our work session until this afternoon. But I was concerned because I know that public input closes on the 16th. How much public input are we getting, Mayor Williams, so far?
I'll defer to Joseph on that. He was going to talk about the process a little bit later, but Joseph, do you have an update for us?
Yes, sir. Without accounting for duplicates, we've got 65 responses so far, and I'll run those down later in the presentation, Commissioner Thornton, if you don't mind.
That'd be fine. So then my next question is, again, I didn't know we were going to have this presentation, and I had reached out to president of the school board to see if we could get a meeting about TADS and maybe even get this same training. And I've been talking to some other folk about it also. So even though the deadline is on the 16th for public input, if there are other things after the 16th, will you be receiving them or suggestions? Will any suggestions be received after the 16th?
Absolutely. And I think, Mayor Gertz, you did speak to the school board.
I did. Dr. Gant and I spoke about a month ago. I wanted to put this on her radar as something that was going to be coming forward. I sent her an early draft of this presentation along with a prospective set of properties to be included, and also highlighted those school district or youth development focused properties that are in each one of the general areas that we're going to be talking about tonight.
That's all I needed. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I didn't answer your question, Commissioner Thornton. So we can extend the public input deadline. We obviously will take in any ideas that come in, but at the end of the day, and we will go back to you a month from now with a run at we're going to try and give you information and hear back from you and get closer to an understanding of what it is that you want, and the conversations that you have and the input that you get are going to color your contributions as well. So really a month from now, we need to have a pretty good sense of be able to bring you something and have you react to it, and then head towards the September voting meeting with a good idea of what we're trying to accomplish. So let me say I'm going to hand it over to GIO Joseph D'Angelo, but at the May 26, 2020 work session, the work that you're about to see was modeled on the initial suggestions Mayor Gertz brought forth on some areas that we could consider. So we are not held to these areas. You could do all of these areas, some of these areas, none of these areas. This was just a starting point to help you understand and help us give you some information. So Joseph, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir. And if you don't mind, I'll just start sharing my screen so you don't have to be bothered flipping through the slide deck.
Okay.
And I am holding my breath this evening that the storm will hold off and you all will be able to see my screen. So can everybody see that? Okay.
Perfect.
Yes, sir. Yep.
All right. As Manager Williams alluded to earlier, I'm here to just offer y'all some of the character of the 6 areas selected by Mayor Gertz a few months back. I'll run down each and we'll take a look at them individually in subsequent slides. It's important to remember that you'll see some boundaries, you'll see some polygonal boundaries. They've been created just to give y'all a baseline for further analysis and discussion. I'm really here tonight to be your waiter. I'm here to take your order. And kind of the quicker I can get an idea of what it is y'all want to see, the faster I can get it into a map, and the faster I can conduct a really deep dive and granular analysis. So you see up here, these are the 6 areas that were presented back in May, and we'll move on to what some people are affectionately calling the bubble map, which is the map that we're using to solicit public input on the ACC Gov website. You can see that a lot of these areas coincide with some of the major thoroughfares around the county. We'll address that in a minute. But while the bubbles were intended to encompass the proposed boundaries of each area, it's again important to note that these are only focal points, and that comments submitted through the public comment tool were not restricted in any way to certain geographic regions of the map. They served more as a bookmark, and folks could have commented on any parcel in the county. So with that in mind, if we take a look at the evaluation criteria, we created some what I would call rough polygons for possible redevelopment areas, based on the mayor's direction. Once again, they're just used at this point for us to share some data with you regarding each of the areas for consideration. We tried to leave out residential properties where possible, but as you'll see many times in this presentation tonight, the boundaries of redevelopment areas must be contiguous. And in order to keep them contiguous, we did have to add some residential in here and there. And I'll give you a full rendering of where residential properties were added, just to preserve contiguity. So here's the now infamous polygon map. 4 of the 6 areas do not include any single or multifamily residential properties. Those were the original 2, the East Downtown area and the Newton Bridge Road area. The North Avenue polygon, as drawn currently, has the highest total of residential properties included. There are 43 of them. Most of them are concentrated in the southwest corner. They're owned either predominantly by the Land Trust or the Athens Housing Authority. The mall area includes 3 residential properties, 2 of which are in the Lake Mueller area, and one of them is kind of a crescent-shaped buffer that exists between the parking lot of the mall and Lake Mueller subdivision, and it's undevelopable. It's a deeded buffer land. It's a common area. West Broad has 2 residential multifamily tracts, again, to preserve contiguity. And Lexington Highway in Gaines School is a bit of a checkerboard. There are 28 residential properties scattered throughout. More on that to come. So just a reminder for some of the considerations for where you can put a TAD. It's got to be urbanized. The Census Bureau uses a 2010 urbanized area map, and there is a little bit of a constraint in the North Avenue polygon, wherein there's a small part that's considered rural, according to the 2010 census. Now, that may change with the 2020 census, and one of the other considerations is that an area has to be served by sewer. There is a small area up there that is also not served by sewer. As the polygon is drawn, it qualifies as being in an urban area, but it is important to note that it's a bit hemmed in its ability to go above the loop in the North Avenue zone. Now we move on to that. There also needs to be a condition of blight or distress, or the area must be considered to be deteriorating or have inadequate infrastructure. We have pretty good infrastructure in Athens-Clarke County. Really, the only area in which we seem to be suffering by most metrics is the FCC puts out a Part 477 map that shows broadband capabilities, and we are considered inadequate in our broadband over much of the county, with the exception of a small sliver in the eastern corner of Winterville, oddly enough. So those of y'all who live in that area, good for you. You probably have no connectivity problems this evening. Once again, the areas have to be contiguous. We're limited to a maximum of 10% of the digest. We'll address that momentarily. the county does not maintain a blight data set per se. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development identifies blighted structures as those that exhibit objectively determinable signs of deterioration sufficient to threaten health, safety, and public welfare. For the purpose of determining blight, staff will rely on ACC Gov records of nuisance property cases as an analog for blight, but again, it's important to note, we don't track blight, as far as I know. So we came up with some criteria for evaluating, again, the character of each of these potential areas. We looked at underdeveloped parcels. We took a tax assessor's data and we looked at how many parcels in an area had a land value that was greater than the improvement value. In short, if the dirt is worth as much as or more than the structures on that property, it's considered to be undeveloped for this purpose. So that's one point of clarification I want to point out for you. We'll see that some CCSD-owned property locations, if they were in the polygon or adjacent or near to the polygon, they've been identified. Any recent development activity per new certificates of occupancy has also been identified. The potential for mixed-use development came from existing zoning. And then we determined whether there was proximity to opportunity zones in some cases, if that was applicable. But when we get into the 6 areas, we'll take a look at that. Manager Williams stated that we were over in terms of that 10% of the digest figure. Through a little bit of trimming between the last session and today, the areas that you'll see represent about 6% of the digest. So about $908 million out of $15.2 billion of digest, unless I got the math wrong, but I'm pretty sure I got the math pretty good. So again, about 6% of the digest is where we're at now, with only commercial and industrial and a few residential properties included in these polygons that you're about to see. This is the mall area polygon. It includes the property on which the mall sits there in the center with that big bright number 1 label, plus any immediately adjacent industrial and commercial land. Here are the numbers pertaining to that. The mall is obviously in a high traffic transportation corridor, which is slated to undergo redevelopment. It's been the subject of numerous studies, as we all are aware. And comprised of a large number of small parcels that are well suited to mixed use. It's seen a lot of permit activity. In fact, I had to check that number, 23%, because it seemed kind of high at first, but it's correct. That's over the last 5 years, roughly. About 14% of the parcels within that zone that you just saw are considered to be underdeveloped, given the metric we talked about earlier. And there is no opportunity zone, state opportunity zone in this area. This is a good opportunity for a quick refresher on opportunity zones for maybe for the folks watching. These are Georgia opportunity zones that I'm talking about when I say opportunity zone, not federal opportunity zones. And these are areas in which businesses in older commercial or industrial corridors can take advantage of a state minimum job credit. It's about $3,500. That goes directly against a business's income tax liability. These areas have to have pretty liberal guidelines for establishment. They have to have 15% or greater poverty by census tract, and there must be an urban or redevelopment plan in place covering a proposed opportunity zone. We've got 8 active opportunity zones in the county currently, if I'm not mistaken. Moving on to the West Broad Hawthorne area. This is all of the parcels zoned commercial or industrial that abut West Broad Street from the West Broad Hawthorne Avenue intersection west roughly to the split.
Mr. D'Angelo.
Yes, sir.
Hey, it's Russell Edwards. You mentioned we have 8 opportunity zones in town. Did I catch that?
Yes, sir.
And are those state? I know there's the kind of quasi-enterprise opportunity zones, the state ones, and then there's the federal opportunity zones, which we have the state ones, right?
these are the state designated opportunity zones as determined, submitted to and approved by DCA.
Okay.
To my knowledge, I don't know that we have any federal opportunity zones in the county.
We don't have any federal opportunity zones. I think Winder and Gainesville are the two closest municipalities with some. Russell, I can send everybody after this meeting a map of those state opportunity zones where people get a job creation tax credit.
Cool. And I think we have a chance to get those federal opportunity zones after this next census. We just have to petition for them.
It hasn't been indicated yet what that application process will look like, sort of in the second wave of application. It's really only about a 2-year-old program. And so I know a lot of municipal and county leaders in the state have been wondering about what that next wave of application may look like. But as of yet, that's undefined.
Cool. Thank you.
It's also worth mentioning that the state zones are mostly up for renewal, I think, within the next year and a half. So it's likely y'all will be seeing more about them sometime pretty soon. Moving along, if I may, the West Broad Hawthorne corridor is overlapped by an opportunity zone. It's got a high potential for mixed use development. As you can see, about 77% of parcels are right for that type of development. It also exhibits the highest number of underdeveloped properties of the 6 areas. It hasn't seen a lot of permit action. And of course, it's proximal to a number of school district and county owned properties. Newton Bridge, we're all a little bit more familiar with because of the last round of TAD discussion. This includes all industrial and commercial properties abutting Newton Bridge Road from roughly Vincent Drive in the north, continuing along North Chase Street, south to the Chase Barber split, to the railroad line, which lies north of Chattooga Avenue. This is best suited for mixed use. Just about everything in this polygon that you just saw is well suited for mixed use. It's seen the least amount of new permit activity over the last 5 or 6 years. It's got 2 prospective future parks identified in the future land use map. It's adjacent to 66 county properties and 3 school district owned properties as well. It's got the largest parcels, the most acreage, and it represents less than 1% of your digest. The Oneida and Chase Opportunity Zone also overlaps some of these parcels.
Mr. D'Angelo.
Yes, sir.
I was hoping to interrupt just real quick. Anybody heard anything about the general time development?
They're still working on that. Quite a bit of infrastructure work already been done over there, and there's some stormwater work, completion of the parking lot. I think at least the exterior shell of about a third of that's been completed.
Great. Thanks, Mayor.
Moving on to east downtown North Oconee. This encompasses everything southwest of the North Oconee River, beginning at the intersection of North Ave and Willow Street. It's also bounded by East Doherty Street. I know everybody knocks me on saying Doherty. That's the way I say it. Sorry. This is the main one, not the extension near 1000 Faces, and then also Jackson and East Broad Street. This represents the smallest acreage and the smallest average parcel size, but also the highest total and the highest mean land values. More than 90% of the parcels are suitable for mixed use. Only about 8% hold undervalued improvements at this time. About 100 University of Georgia owned properties or county properties are proximal to it. Of course, there are 2 federally owned properties that are relatively nearby. 5% of the associated parcels in this zone have undergone some development over the last 5 or 6 years. There is no current opportunity zone existing in this area, but it is proximal to the Oak Street Opportunity Zone, and it's also sitting in a designated urban redevelopment area. North Avenue and Loop 10. Your boundaries roughly are Loop 10, 29, 441 to the north and east, North Avenue to the west, and 4th Street, Bray Street, and Evelyn C. Neely, roughly to the south. About a third of these parcels are suitable for mixed-use development. This area has the lowest percentage of undeveloped property of any of the 6. The mean parcel value is approaching about $1 million. And despite that fact, you're only looking at about 0.5% of the digest. Or, I'm sorry, 0.5% of the digest. My apologies. Very little new development has taken place over the last 5+ years. If you go back a little further, that's not the case. A lot of that property has been redeveloped within the last 15 or 20 years. This is adjoined by a small number of county-owned properties, and as I mentioned earlier, there are 28 properties controlled by Athens Land Trust in the immediate vicinity, and there is an active opportunity zone in this area. And I mentioned earlier also that one of the things that we continue to look into is that it appears that, according to the most recent urban classification map from the Census Bureau, that area to the west and northwest of this area, as drawn, is apparently not considered to be urbanized. So that may limit the extent to the west and northwest to which this polygon may be able to be drawn. Moving on to Lexington Highway and Gaines School. This includes all commercial and industrial property abutting Gaines School Road from the intersection with Lexington down to about Ponderosa Drive, but it actually doesn't make it to Ponderosa Drive because what you see there sort of in the southwest corner is residential. Also in the western part, there is a small subdivision that is currently included as drawn. Lexington Highway has the smallest number of parcels. It also has the most underdeveloped parcels, but it also should be noted that some development activity has been curtailed due to the fact that some parcels coincide with the airport's hazard overlay district, which can subject some types of development to height restriction. 2/3 of the parcels in the zone are suitable for mixed use. Only about 4% have seen new development in the last 5 or so years. And this has the lowest mean parcel value of the 6 areas. I think about $667,000 is the mean parcel value. All parcels are in or adjacent to a major travel corridor, obviously, which is also like Atlanta Highway Corridor slated for redevelopment. And some parcels will coincide with an existing opportunity zone, depending on how the final product is drawn if you select to go this way. And now we move into the public input survey. There haven't been any in-person public meetings, and so in light of that, we developed a survey tool to let residents tell us about what projects and specifically what parcels they would like to fund through their tax dollars in and around these redevelopment areas. And as it stands currently, we have a deadline of 1 week from today for the submission of information relative to these 6 potential redevelopment areas. As I mentioned earlier, we've so far gotten about 65 responses, 59 of which were from the original survey tool that we developed. We did get some feedback from Commissioner Parker regarding the usability of that original tool. And in lieu of removing that tool from the website entirely, we added a second simplified survey, which doesn't require a person to choose a parcel before making their comments. Everything else is pretty much the same. They can choose a potential redevelopment area from a list, just a pull-down list. We've gotten 6 responses to date via that tool. We'll take all the comments together and aggregate them when the survey does expire. In general, comments were pretty positive so far. There is pretty wide support for mixed income housing, regional stormwater projects, enhanced connectivity for active transportation. Most of the negative comments received, and I'm going to go ahead and I've got to go to my spreadsheet here to figure out what what some of the numbers were. But most of the negative comments received were mainly centered around a desire to see the line held on tax rates and concern about property values increasing over the last few years. And I'm afraid I have lost the latest survey numbers, which is problematic. So I apologize for that. About 14% were not supportive of the TAD overall. Many submitters did not submit a comment. There were some obvious duplicate comments, which are going to have to be further processed because some individuals in the multiple choice questions would offer an answer, and then in the comments it was obviously a cut and paste operation. Some individuals are supportive of development of a TAD in the Triangle Plaza area. One individual mentioned Holly Hills for possible inclusion and also extension of transit lines. And one individual specifically mentioned the exclusion of Timothy Road from any potential TAD. But as I mentioned, once y'all deem that the survey ought to be closed, we'll go ahead and aggregate those comments and give you the raw version as well as some light analysis related to any comments that were submitted by members of the public for your perusal. And with that, I will turn it back over to Manager Williams.
Well, thank you, Joseph. And why July 16th for the expiration of the public input? That was based on you having an August voting meeting decision. But as as I spoke about earlier, you've got several things to really ponder on. And I know that you want the benefit of that public input, so we are more than willing to extend that as you maybe light up your networks and imploring people to try and participate and share with us. So let's talk about those decision points. And Joseph, thank you for trimming it down to get below the 10%. And as I said before, these aren't done areas. These are areas, these are a starting point. Mayor Gertz shared with us, you can add to it. And that's one reason why we created the public tool like we did. We didn't expect people to understand TADs enough to draw entire boundaries for us. But what we're asking them is, tell us what your hopes and desires and projects that you're interested in seeing. And they don't have to be within the boundaries that we've got here on the screen. They can be just outside. It could be something as elected officials you never heard of or thought of. And that may be something that you want to bake into the redevelopment area when you ultimately decide it. So you've got, we've got 6 areas here. It's hard enough to do one, but if you want to move these things forward, then you can do multiple redevelopment areas, multiple TADs. And in each of those TADs, you need to decide, what the boundaries are, what's going to be redevelopment, what's going to be a TAD. Of the TAD, is it an area TAD where you don't have a specific developer? Because, you could leave a redevelopment area and then mid-year next year, a developer shows up and says, we want to do a deal. Or you could have an area TAD that's established and that happens and then you amend it. And Dan McCrae can tell us more about that. Remember the 10% tax digest threshold. We're going to need to hear from you. I've got the goals at the bottom here, but the goals of the TAD help inform the types of improvements that you want to see within the TAD and hence the use of TAD funds. When you tell us more about that, then staff can help or you can tell us either way. Or both, what the costs are anticipated there. And then that can help us determine what the term of the TAD is. Now, when you're doing an area TAD, we're going to have to guess on the growth of the TAD, of the value. It may happen very quickly. It may take a long time. So those are some of your decision points as we move towards the September voting meeting. And we'll be giving you more information. And our hopes are that anything that you tell us tonight, anything we hear from the public, we can begin to recraft these areas, add areas, take areas away, and then help you move towards a decision.
Was there a slide that had the various attributes of each TAD together in a chart or a table so we could compare, like the number of mixed use parcels available or available for mixed use redevelopment, all of those different sorts of metrics you all had lined up for each?
Yes. Joseph has compiled a summary evaluation, which has a short descriptor narrative of each of those 6 sites. And it also has the data compared for each redevelopment area all together. And we can send that out to you immediately following this presentation.
Okay.
I have a question. I know that Joseph said that the North Avenue area is not is included as urbanized by the 2010 census. It might change with the 2010. It might change with the 2020 census. What bearing does that have as we approach the deadline for us to make a decision?
And Joseph, feel free to speak up. I don't think the census really has any bearing. There's nothing that's population-based here. It's really based on the value of properties. So the census itself, Commissioner Edwards mentioned that perhaps a federal opportunity zone may come in the wake of that would be, I think, the only thing that may or may not impact some, reasons why you would consider it here or not there. But the census is not directly related to this process at all.
I recall from Dan McRae's earlier conversation that one of the baseline requirements in Georgia for a tax allocation district to occur is that there be the existence of sewer there. And so that may be why I guess that would be the sort of outside the loop kind of catty corner across from the old Sky City area wouldn't be available for inclusion in a TAD.
And my next question is, and it goes back to, and I appreciate taking input after the 16th. One of the things that I was planning is to talk more to some of our my constituents in District 9, because actually 60-something respondents. I think that all of us as commissioners need to make sure that our constituents are participating in this. It's not, we can't keep saying that people just didn't know that we're asking for this information. So I guess my question is, County Manager Blaine Williams, is and I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to say it to make it public. I do think that I am going to be calling on you to talk to some folk, just like we're talking now about this. That was my plan prior to knowing that this was going to be on our agenda tonight. So I guess I'm asking, or either putting you on notice, or however you want to receive it, is that I do plan on would like for folk in my district and other districts to have this opportunity that may not have known either that this was going to be a discussion tonight. So I hope that you will be available with Joseph. Thank you.
Absolutely, Commissioner Thornton. And we really look to all y'all to help impress upon people that we need to hear from them. There was some discussion the other night about the Atlanta Highway and Lexington Road corridor, that maybe we didn't have as many responses there. After that discussion, staff let me know that there were some, and it can't all just be online. I mean, that's very convenient during the COVID pandemic. But of those, comments that we got back, there were, I think Nextdoor was one of the things that we used. There were over 2,700 impressions, meaning that 2,700 people saw it. but only so many people filled it out. So part of the challenge too is for us to, I knew this was going to be hard because TADs are not very intuitive. I mean, it takes some explaining to do. So Commissioner Thornton, I'm glad to do that. So if there aren't any other questions,
I have some questions.
Sure.
Go ahead, Melissa.
I have some questions. I'm sorry. I'm on my phone, so I can't use the little hand. I have some questions. First of all, the mall area. That does not include Cleveland Road Elementary.
No, it's a few miles from there.
So, okay, so it is a few miles. I couldn't really tell on this map. And also the West Broad area, that doesn't seem to include Beach Haven. Is that correct? I'm looking at the map. Does it include Beach Haven? And if not, why would it not include that piece of county property that could be ripe for some investment, especially as it pertains to Greenway?
So, and again, this is just a starting point. It can include that. These can take whatever shape that you want them.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't take any off the it wouldn't add any to the amount of the tax digest because it's county-owned property. And I know that stretch of Greenway is kind of low on the priority list, so it could be, a decade or more before we get there. And there is some low-income housing. The Sycamore Road area isn't included in there either, and there are some dire needs for sidewalk infrastructure there. So I'm wondering if we couldn't go ahead and include that Beach Haven area and that Sycamore Road area if we were to consider this, and maybe funnel some of that investment into adding some pedestrian infrastructure. And there's some nasty stormwater issues there too. So that, I mean, because I feel like my first impulse in this area is I feel like it doesn't need a lot of public investment, or the public investment that it definitely does need it pertains to West Broad Street itself, which is a state-controlled highway, and I don't know if we would be able to affect any actual change on that highway. I feel like it needs significant traffic calming and fewer lanes. But if we were to include that residential area that is in some dire need of public infrastructure and our large county-owned property, that would allow us to get that Greenway stretch through there, and some other investment in Beach Haven, which would be a significant asset to the whole area and hopefully draw some development to that area. So I just want to put that little bit of advice in there. And East Downtown, I just don't see how East Downtown could qualify for a TAD, and I don't think that it would need it. The investment that's coming there is so significant. The private interest in that area, I just can't wrap my head around why we would want a TAD there. When we do have so much private investment and the vast majority of the property is publicly owned. I'd like to see maybe some percentage of what the publicly owned property tax value might be versus, or what percentage of that property of the overall value would be publicly owned. I just can't wrap my head around, East Downtown needing a TAD to lure in investment.
Well, I know what's been discussed in the past was that, a TAD could help to, say, renovate the Kelly Diversified building. You could use funds for that purpose. But we're not defending. I mean, these are the things that were discussed last year, and they are certainly here. Commissioner Link, that's exactly the type of input, like on West Broad, that you gave us, is here's some things that I'd like to see. Here are some goals that I think that are important to the area, and that we need that for every single one of these, or any others that you care to add. So we need to understand the goals. We need specific projects that we can then cost out. And all of that will be brought together in the ensuing redevelopment plans to help create the TADs.
One of the things, Melissa, that I'd emphasize with East Downtown is to think of a TAD not just as an opportunity to do redevelopment in a generic way, or maybe the way that we've seen already, but to do redevelopment in a way that pursues some of the goals that we've had in common, like mixed income housing, where, for example, if there was going to be redevelopment of some parcels, we could say, well, given the existence of a TAD, we would, by virtue of that, would be able to say 20 or 25% of the units would be permanently affordable. So in some ways, to craft, you might even think of it as the social nature of downtown for a more diverse constituency.
I just don't see that there's any property left for that kind of negotiation. I mean, we have these county-owned properties that are already beholden to our SPLOST projects without those stipulations. I mean, there's a couple other, as far as I can remember, I just had a meeting about this today. It seems like that land is, for the vast majority of it, is already has some purposes intended for it.
We have some Jackson Street properties that might be contemplated for that purpose. Approaching Lay Park.
Okay, down in there. Yeah, I could see that.
Okay. I was going to talk about next steps, key dates, but I think Commissioner Denson, did you raise your hand?
I did, yeah. Thank you, Manager Williams. I really appreciate this kind of the way it's all been structured. I think it's a lot easier for everybody to be able to digest. And I kind of just I had a few points on the mall area. Just looking at this, I mean, I think it's obvious to all of us that the mall has some needs with how it's situated and the economic situation that's there. I guess doing research on the way TADs are and the way they've been utilized in other cities, I guess I'm a little bit unsure if a TAD is a good tool for at least specifically the mall property, which this seems like this is what we're talking about, the anchor for this. Just for part of it is just like it being one giant lot that's already been kind of structured as a mall. And at least from what Commissioner Neesmith used to tell us about them saying that they are actually profitable in the way that they're working right now, I guess I'm just not sure if TADs are the tool that area needs for whatever we wanted to do with it. But in this area, I do think that there's some opportunity around in between Atlanta Highway and the Jennings Mill Parkway area. Been seeing a lot of interesting development happening there. Some of it housing, some of it weird industrial area, some of it retail popping up in that industrial. It seems like that area, people are going to, for whatever reason, for some interesting ideas. And I'd like to see, if we're going to focus on the area, at least looking into those few blocks there. On the West Broad, I think that this shows that is a ripe area. Definitely agree with Commissioner Link talking about getting some of the potential greenway opportunities and parks areas that we have there looped into this, that we could use some of that funding in those areas. That could then offer connectivity to Forest Heights and other residential areas nearby. The Newton Bridge Road, I think, is one that's worthwhile, which we've talked about quite a bit, just because of the potential already there shown of that anchor development we've talked about. I do share on the downtown. I do share some of Commissioner Link's concerns with it. At the same time, I do think that our infrastructure, when it comes to along the river and the greenway and stuff down there, is underdeveloped and underutilized. I think there's a lot of opportunity there that's just not been actually dug into over the decades. That you go to other downtown districts and they have done cool, interesting things that make their river districts kind of an attraction, which we have not done. So I can understand that, but if we were going to do so, I would like us to find out a way that we could have this funding more directly benefit the residents of East Athens that are so nearby there, that have needs, whether that be in the Triangle Plaza or in other areas going through. I understand that loops in a bunch of residential properties, but if we could find a creative way to have them connected, I think that'd be worthwhile. North Avenue one, I'm happy for us to explore that. It sounds like the census areas around the rule limitations could be problematic, and I guess the timeline of the way the census is going to come out would be difficult for us since we have to finalize this relatively soon before we're going to have that census data changed. If I'm wrong on that, I'd like to to have more information about if we can change that moving forward after the census data comes out. And then on the last one, on the Lexington Highway, there's obvious need in this area. And I would like to see us explore further down Lexington Highway on the east side. There's a number of retail restaurants. There's a number of Fats Cafe was there. There's an old credit union. Some retail spaces that have been sitting vacant for years. I think that the area between, say, Walmart and Southeast Clarke Park and the Gaines School intersection is really, again, underutilized, underdeveloped. There's a lot of people that live out in that area, and a lot of people that have needs. It's a very low income area that gets kind of forgotten oftentimes. And so I'd like to, if we're going to have that one be in there, I think we should definitely explore going further down Lexington Highway. I hear the idea that this is a lot, right? We have 6 here. And I was doing some research and looking up like the city of Atlanta, which obviously much bigger than us in many ways. And I believe that Atlanta has 10, if I'm correct, active tax allocation districts within their city limits. Some of them being much more active than others and much more successful than others. So I do wonder, though, what the challenges would be for oversight and administration if we were to have 6. And if those challenges are great and the complexities are great, I guess I would like a recommendation on what we think is a more realistic number of different districts for us to have. That maybe we could start talking about trimming down if we need to. And then, another thing is looking at how some of the other ones across the state of Georgia are structured. Again, with especially Atlanta, with them having multiple ones, which we're kind of talking about here, they have a separate list of development objectives for every district. And which I think is obviously the way we'd really need to do this if we're going to be successful, because the Newton Bridge district is going to have very different needs and probably different goals and objectives than the one on Lexington Highway would. So would we need to have those 6 separate or however many separate development objectives created before we do this? Or are we able to do more of a large, broad one right now, and then next year dig further in and create those very specific developmental objectives and structures for every unique one?
Tim, I'll jump in with a couple of ideas and then ask staff to provide some other flesh on the bones that they may be able to do. One of the prospects that I'll suggest is that we could have the commission bless these areas as redevelopment target areas. And so to say, we recognize that every one of these really has a lot of room for growth, and we could see an enormous amount of community benefit in every one of these geographic locales, as we probably could in some others that aren't even on this list. And then, given the complexities that you note, really target 1 or maybe 2 to become tax allocation districts in this calendar year, to move from that redevelopment target zone into tax allocation district status. And what makes sense as the trigger for that transition is when you do have a development partner at the table. And so you with absolute certainty are going to have some new tax dollars generated within the zone that aren't just the result of the natural reevaluation and natural increase, but you're really going to have some heft to the financial heft to the district. And so in a way that, the Chase Barber Newton Bridge nook there we certainly know we'll have that. We'll be able to get some of that infrastructure off the ground, given the mechanism that Blaine described of being able to bond finance some of that. But by the commission blessing these as redevelopment areas, you really send up a flare to the development community, and you say, hey, we really care a bunch about seeing some fabulous investment in each one of these areas. And then over time, we can refine what that set of goals, as you described, look like, and then what that new infrastructure could be as well. So hopefully that helps a little. The one note I would make about the mall, and we're focused on TADS in this presentation, but sort of on a parallel track with this, the planning department is looking at some high density growth areas that really could be transit oriented development nodes and see become almost like a mini downtown. And the mall is.
Uh-oh.
Well, while we're waiting for Kelly to rejoin us, so I want to be clear, there is no additional burden associated with having multiple TADs. So go ahead, Kelly. Sorry.
We lost you for a second.
We lost you for a second.
Oh, sorry. No. I think stuff was coming and going. I just wanted to make a quick note that the mall is one of the areas that the planning department, planning commission right now are looking at as a prospective new very high density zone that could also host a West Side Transit hub. And so the TAD would be able to help both with some affordable housing if you see density growth there, as well as this transit infrastructure.
I have a quick question about the mall. I feel like that is a project that could be suitable for a project-specific TAD, being that the mall is such a huge property and yeah, it's increasingly blighted. I believe another anchor store just announced closure recently.
Well, I was just going to finish the conversation with Commissioner Denson. So the extra TADs, extra geographic areas really isn't an extra burden on staff at all. And I was glad to hear that Joseph had dialed it back to 6%. I would say that you want to leave some flexibility for the future. And reflecting more on Commissioner Thornton's question and some back and forth with staff. So the census could change how you look at North Avenue if, the area above the loop becomes urbanized. But we probably won't know that for another year. And so it's, and Brad tells me that it usually takes 2 or 3 years after a census to begin changing like the MPO boundaries that's based on urbanized area. So Commissioner Thornton, the census could drive the shape that you ultimately would want there. I do think you're able to amend TADs if you leave yourself some flexibility. And so I know that we've all learned a lot since last year just going through the process. And that was my only point, Commissioner Denson, is do you want to use up all of your TAD capacity this year, or do you want to do some and leave it for next year? But your attention is needed on every one of these. We really need to hear from you on your goals, your hopes, the cost that you anticipate, and then the mechanics of it as well.
And I appreciate that feedback, and also from Mayor Gertz. And so, especially on this quick timeline, then, I guess it really feels like we as a body need to be really prioritizing this list of which ones we feel like are the ones that need to be on this year's, and which ones we feel like maybe are the best to put on next year or the year after that. Just because I realize that we're on a very strict timeline here. And so with that, I guess hearing that feedback, it sounds like perhaps like ones like the mall and North Avenue, or maybe like North Avenue specifically, maybe is better for us to hold off till next year until we get the census changes, and then look at it then to see if we could possibly expand it out. But the ones that sound like to me are the ones that we need to hit this year and have in place for next year would be Newton Bridge. And honestly, I really like the potential out on the Lexington Highway, honestly. Just knowing what's out there, and with the changes coming up soon with the highway corridor, and also the building of the new library and stuff out in that area somewhere. if we were to prioritize two, I think those are the two I would say for this year, but definitely at least Newton Bridge.
I do agree with Newton Bridge for a lot of reasons, but I don't think that I think that we all need to walk away from here and come up with a prioritized list. I did support Newton Bridge for a lot of reasons. That would have been my first choice, believe it or not. But I don't think we're going to rubber stamp anything today. And we need to be given that time to do that and not plant that kind of seed. So let's not, jump ahead. We just got this information tonight. At least I did. And I want to be fair to everybody. But I did believe for a lot of reasons of Newton Bridge. But I don't want to get up here and taint somebody else's thought until we all get this information, kind of absorb it a little bit. So, that's how I feel about it.
And just to be clear, I'm just simply talking about my own opinion out there, just so I'm just giving feedback so everybody else knows where I'm at, and I'm very happy to hear where everybody else is at. Yeah, and the timeline I say, because this has us voting in less than a month on the final list.
I understand that. I get it. Okay.
I have a question. Could staff possibly provide us with like a short kind of ballpark list of public investment that could be the focus of the TADs in each area, so we kind of can weigh the projects that might end up coming out of each of these areas with the TAD money?
Commissioner, are you talking about public investment to date or proposed public investment?
Like the needs for public infrastructure in each area, whether it's school district related needs or sidewalk related needs or, stormwater related needs. I presume that there's some kind of, pipe dream ballpark list out there for each of these areas. And I know that we've discussed projects in most of these areas, whether they did or didn't make the SPLOST list or, the Athens in Motion, like how many of these have projects that are in the Athens in Motion's plan?
Well, and that's a great point, because this is going to be a very iterative discussion. I mean, we need to hear from you about what you'd like to see. I hear you saying, well, what are the existing, we've spent a lot of time and effort on plans and public input, what's already out there. But for instance, if you're going to totally redraw one, then we need to know that now, because we can put a lot of work into these. So I think hearing from y'all, and to Commissioner Thornton's point, we've got a little bit of, we need you to reflect on this and get back to us. We can certainly spend some time on some boundaries, but we have, like the Athens in Motion plans all over the county. And if you're
I'm talking about in this specific bound. Like I could actually take a look at the areas that are within my own district and even that West Broad area, and just knowing what I know that there are. Like Beach Haven has the Greenway running through it. Beach Haven is a public property that's not developed and not enough to be open to the public yet. That's potential for public investment, yet it's not in the current boundaries. Certainly Newton Bridge Road has Greenway alongside it, and there are certainly some bike and pedestrian infrastructure needs out there that are on Athens in Motion's plan. It might even be worth just presenting these areas to Athens in Motion and getting just some general input from them on the prioritized projects in each of these. That could help us weigh like what are the areas we want to pursue sooner rather than later.
And I want to and I'm agreeing with Commissioner Link. I think that we all have to be ambassadors of this TAD information and get it out there. And if there's some parameters that we can develop, because what I'm finding, which I don't think is a good thing, the loudest voices always seem to get the attention. we need to make sure we have multiple voices. And the best way to get multiple voices is to make sure we have everybody knowing the same information and promoting that. This was new for me tonight. I've learned a lot tonight. I want to make sure what I've learned that I can share it with somebody else to make an objective decision. That was my point when I said that I would like to reach back out to Blaine and Joseph for those folk in my district that need to be informed. But if we had a matrix to go by, what is the best that will come this year, next year? I don't mind North Avenue being next year, but let's be able to explain to folk why it would be best for next year and why another district would be best this year. So that was my point. Maybe I didn't articulate it clearly, but I'm trying to be objective for what's best for for Athens-Clarke County.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I didn't know Mike was here.
So,
Hey, Mike.
hey, Melissa, how are y'all? So, I mean, if you look at slide 17, it kind of tells you, it kind of provides the information that we need. I mean, look at the list, you know, and look at what the potential is here. Because what I would argue is let's put all of them on the list for next year. I mean, why not? I mean, let's think big. I mean, they're not anywhere near the 10%. I know we've got time to wait on some, but all of them have some sort of attention that needs brought to them. But look at the one that I think if we want to narrow it down, I mean, certainly there are some here that give us some indication about what to narrow down. Look at the percentage of parcels with mixed-use development potential in the mall area, and certainly Newton Bridge, and I mean, there's 4 of them right there that almost reach 80 to 90%. So, you know, if you're looking at a TAD as some sort of incentive to help us with some of the things that we need, like affordable housing, like sidewalks. I mean, certainly the mall area. We talk about the mall all the time, about what's going to happen with the mall. And we talk about sidewalks and Atlanta Highway. Sidewalks and Atlanta Highway are part of Athens in Motion. Athens in Motion has their list out there. You can look at the number of undeveloped parcels that you could go by. You could also look at the number of county-owned parcels. So you know, over on Newton Bridge Road, there's 66 county-owned parcels. I say that to say, you know, maybe that's the incentive there that it may not need a tab. Maybe we just put those county-owned parcels up for, you know, some redevelopment purposes. I don't know how many are empty or what that means, but I guess at the end of the day, I like all of these on the list, and I don't know why we wouldn't move forward with all of them. It's nowhere near the 10%, and go from there. So, but I guess I would look at certainly which ones offer the most potential as far as mixed use development that we're trying to achieve, and number of parcels mixed use development potential, and the mall kind of rises above the top on several of them. But anyway, let's do all of them and make everybody happy. How does that sound? Okay, I'm done.
So can I weigh in real quick on that number of undeveloped parcels and mixed use?
Real quick, because we need to wrap up.
I don't know that the number is the crux, but maybe the percentage overall area, because the downtown has a whole lot of potential mixed use parcels, but they're very, very small parcels, and they're separate properties. The potential for actually getting people on board. I just think that number could be better translated into percentage or overall area, maybe.
Well, you take that the number of undeveloped property. I mean, I guess you take all this information together, Melissa.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like the acreage because they're a high number might not mean that the acreage is actually very high.
Right.
The overall percentage of the area. I'm trying to. You know, you get what I'm getting at?
Yeah. So wanting to go ahead and create some direction, there are a handful of particulars that people were interested in getting that I think would kind of benefit their decisions or thoughts about the area. One of those is those public projects that could be within each one of these areas, things that are embedded in the Athens in Motion plan, the Greenway Network plan, and other public works kinds of things. Melissa, you mentioned that a few minutes ago.
And parks, long-term
right.
park plans.
Yeah, another one of those, is just to think, well, what could sequencing look like? And so, just be considering that over the next couple of weeks. A couple folks asked for additional public input time. Blaine, if we could just go ahead and push that portal opening until at least the end of July, that would be really beneficial to everybody. And then we can return to this for conversation at the evening of agenda setting. And Blaine, I think on the front end, you said that really September rather than August could be our target date. Is that right?
Yes, sir. We pushed it an additional month, knowing that there's a lot of moving parts here.
All right. That's great. I think that gives us then, 7 weeks now. Perfect. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
If I might, real quick, I'm sorry not to belabor this, but let me just to telegraph the process while we've got the public here and you as well. So we're looking for that September decision. So what happens after that? Well, those parcels that you've selected within however many redevelopment areas or TADs, staff has to really drill down and do the research and create the draft redevelopment plans. We will be going to the Board of Education to present to them, not unlike what we did last year. And then, so in a very short order, staff will take everything that y'all have told us and we'll pull it in these redevelopment plans and bring it to you on October the 20th. There'll be a public hearing held. Hopefully you'll be adopted in November. That gives us a little bit of buffer in case things slip. But the actual TAD will be created by the end of the year so that January 1st, when those values are set, the baseline's in place. And we've got a different graphic rendering of checkpoints there. And so we will come back to you, as the mayor said, in August. And I'll stop there, sir.
All right. Thanks, everybody. All right. I think we've got a few executive session items kind of following the public session here. And so I'll give Public Information Office a couple minutes to transition us from the public meeting being broadcast to the private executive session.